Chapter 184. 11:00 in the morning. Gu Lao brought the two brothers to the tea house. He was slightly surprised that he didn't see Qin Ruoying today. In his impression, this young couple was inseparable. Even if they had to go out for business, it was usually Qin Shi who went out, and Qin Ruoying stayed behind to take care of the children. Although he was puzzled, Gu Lao wasn't a gossipy old man. After taking the green tea that Qin Shi brewed for him, he laughed and said, "Today's weather is good. Although the sun isn't out, I feel refreshed. When people get old, they tend to lose focus. It's rare for me to be so clear-headed. I'm really not used to it. Come. Since I'm in good spirits today, let's have a good fight." Gu Lao was in high spirits today, and it was obvious that he was in good spirits. However, his words made Qin Shi frown slightly. In order to not let Gu Lao notice his abnormality, Qin Shi immediately smiled and said, "Wait a moment, I'll go get the chess pieces." The so-called spring sleepiness, autumn lack, summer naps, and winter sleeps. Once winter came, the human body would be affected and stimulated by the low temperature, causing the capillaries under the skin to begin to contract. The blood flow would be relatively reduced, and the sweat glands and pores would close to reduce heat emission to maintain the normal body temperature. This was a biological instinct, so when winter came, everyone would feel sleepy and unable to wake up. Today wasn't a sunny day. Although it wasn't snowing, the thick dark clouds still covered a large part of the sun, and the temperature outside was estimated to be around 0 degrees. The reason why Gu Lao was in good spirits was clearly because of the recovery of spiritual energy, causing the spiritual energy in Hohai to skyrocket. It was almost at the level of Zongnanhai. Living in such a place, of course, one would feel refreshed. What would the rich spiritual energy directly affect? For immortal cultivators, cultivation would become easier, and even achieve twice the result with half the effort. Although mortals didn't know how to cultivate, if they lived in such a place with rich spiritual energy for a long time, their physical condition would become better and better, so much so that they would be immune to all diseases and live a long life. There were longevity villages all over the world, and these villages all had one thing in common, which was excellent geographical location. Deep canyons, lush forests, birds, flowers, and mountain springs. These places were called paradise, and at the same time, the best place to cultivate in seclusion. It was actually very easy to find a paradise. Wherever the average lifespan of the villagers was more than 80 years old, that place must be a paradise. Huaxia's leaders had a long lifespan. Why? In addition to the professional healthcare team, the blessed land was also a big factor. Although mortals couldn't detect the existence of spiritual energy, they wouldn't know whether the place was good or not. Days long's a long time. Only one night had passed, and even Gu Lao was affected. His spirit had also become much better. Thinking of this, Qin Shi asked Gu Lao to wait for a while, and then he got up and went back to the bar, and then called Qin Shueqing. The last time he called, Qin Shueqing didn't pick up, and she didn't call back. Qin Shi thought she was busy, so she threw the matter to the back of her mind. Now it seemed that this matter wasn't that simple. The phone went through, and after a while, Qin Shueqing's voice came from the other side. "Hello? It's me, are you busy? I have a question to ask you." "Give me a second." Qin Shueqing was a little noisy on the other side. After a while, her voice came from the phone again. "Okay, go ahead." She was his sister-in-law, so Qin Shi didn't dawdle with her, and went straight to the topic. "Have you Wu Lian people noticed anything unusual recently? Like a vision of heaven and earth?" After hearing his question, Qin Shueqing was obviously shocked, and she hurriedly asked on the other side of the phone, "Who told you? Do I need someone to tell me?" Qin Shi replied matter-of-factly, and Qin Shueqing suddenly choked. After all, she had already experienced the strength of her cheap brother-in-law. Because Qin Shi's question involved some secrets, after hesitating for a while, Qin Shueqing whispered, "Yes, a large oasis suddenly appeared in the Taklamakan desert, and it's spreading out at an astonishing speed. Do you think plants need time to grow? But that place turned from a desert to an oasis overnight, which is obviously a supernatural phenomenon, so the Wu Lian blocked the news immediately. The desert turned into an oasis? Xianxia thought for a while, and then asked again, what else? Are there any changes in animals? For example, monsters, and other existences, have there been more? Yes, it is said that a forest ranger saw a monster more than 3 meters tall in Xianxia. The Wu Lian has sent people, but they haven't found any trace of the monster yet. Sure enough, the recovery of spirit power would bring great changes to the world. The desert turning into an oasis was only the first step, and there would be more and more wonders that ordinary people could not imagine. Maybe in the future, the earth would become like the Tianxian world. Qin Shuiqing waited for a while, and seeing that Xianxia didn't reply, she asked directly, do you know something? Her question interrupted Xianxia's thoughts. After thinking for a while, Xianxia gave an irrelevant answer, you should cultivate according to the cultivation method I gave you. According to the current situation, you should be able to step into the foundation establishment stage very soon. At that time, you will naturally know what happened in this world. Foundation establishment? Xianxia gave her the cultivation method, but he didn't teach her the general knowledge of the cultivation world, so Qin Shuiqing was still a little confused about the specific realm, and could only practice according to the cultivation method every day in a daze. Qin Shuiqing always felt that her cheap brother-in-law might know something, so she kept asking over the phone. However, Xianxia didn't answer her questions at all, but said directly, that's it, I'll hang up first. Everything happened too suddenly, and the time was still short, so Xianxia couldn't make any conclusions for the time being. There was always a process to everything, and instead of making wild guesses, it was better to see the results when the time came. Hey, wait, you said that as long as I form the golden core, my broken arm will be able to recover. Then Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core. What's above that? What level are you at? Soul formation. After saying that, Xianxia didn't say anything more and directly hung up the phone. Hearing the beeping sound of the phone, Qin Shuiqing couldn't help but think over and over again. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core. Soul formation. Chapter 185. For the next few days, Xianxia would bring the little girl to the tea house to date with the brothers every day. Qin Ruoying, on the other hand, was cultivating hard at home. Out of the 24 hours in a day, she really did cultivate for 20 hours. Cultivation was a boring thing to begin with. Since she had already decided to embark on this path, learning to enjoy the boredom and experiencing different kinds of pleasure from cultivation was the only thing Qin Ruoying had to do at the moment. Xianxia had been paying attention to the news reports during this period. In addition, he was also constantly paying attention to the headlines, Weibo, public accounts, and other media platforms. Things were different now. With the arrival of the mobile internet era, even the old man selling pancakes on the street learned to use QR codes to collect money. If there was a phenomenon of heaven and earth, it would inevitably cause a big social sensation. Even if the government deliberately blocked it, there would always be some gossip circulating on the internet. But to Xianxia's surprise, a few days had passed, and he couldn't find any news about the supernatural phenomenon of the desert turning into an oasis on the internet. With his sister-in-law's personality, he basically ruled out the possibility that she would joke with Xianxia. Since he couldn't see it on the internet, it was either blocked by the government immediately, or because that place was so remote that not many people knew about it. However, it was understandable when he thought about it. The recovery of spirit Qi would definitely affect those inaccessible places first, which gave the government some time to react. The Wu Lian people were probably out in full force and on standby at any time. Why was Xianxia paying so much attention? Because this was also a big event that could affect him. Not to mention why a planet in the age of chaos suddenly became a holy land for cultivation. There must be a big secret hidden in how he got to the heavenly jade realm. 5 years on Earth, 500 years on heavenly jade. This involved time and space, which was obviously not a level that soul formation cultivators could understand. What kind of existence was capable of doing all this? Magic treasure? Spell? Array? Or human? Why did it choose him? And not someone else? Ever since Qianxi discovered the recovery of spirit qi, these questions had been constantly flashing in his mind. It was true that he had 500 years of experience in the heavenly jade domain, but in essence, Qianxi had always been the kind of person who would be satisfied as long as he had a wife and children, a hot pit, porridge, steamed buns, and 2 tails of wine. There was no shortage of ambitious great men in the world, but there was no shortage of contented mortals like Qianxi. As long as his wife and daughter were well, and his family was harmonious, he could guard this small tea house and live happily for the rest of his life. Some people always believed that contentment equated to lack ambition. In fact, this was a sign of ignorance. It was perhaps the biggest joke in the world for a person who didn't have a strong heart to turn around and laugh at a person who had a strong heart. As the song goes, "You're not truly happy, your smile is just a camouflage you wear. Being content with what one has doesn't mean that one won't be vigilant in times of peace." Being vigilant in times of peace did not mean that one would have groundless fears. The torrent of the era was coming, and Qianxi just wanted to continue her role as a spectator. Having seen all the prosperity of the world, one should naturally float like water. December 12th, Qin Yongyan, who had been in seclusion, was also called out by Qin Ruoying. Her sister-in-law's phone couldn't be reached, so the family of 4 took a taxi and went straight to the Battling Great Wall. They were going to hold a strange wedding with no ceremony and no guests, only a father-in-law, wife, and son-in-law. No, there was also a daughter. Qin Ruoying originally wanted to persuade Qianxi to forget about it. After all, Niannian was already so old, and they had already gotten a marriage certificate. It felt a little strange to specially do this now. Although she had originally wanted to marry Qianxi under her father's witness, she didn't need to do any ceremony. She didn't need any grand ceremony. As long as her father, second uncle's family, and Aunt Zhang were present, Qin Ruoying would be satisfied. But second uncle hadn't come back yet, and Lin Qing was busy all day. In this winter, she couldn't specially invite Aunt Zhang to come to Shangjing to enjoy the cold wind, could she? She was overwhelmed by the joy of returning home, so she agreed to Qianxi in a daze. Otherwise, she would have to think about it carefully and choose a good day. For example, after the new year, when the winter was over and the flowers bloomed in spring, it would be good. However, Qin Ruoying wanted to change the day, but Qianxi didn't agree. What a joke, how could he delay the matter of marrying a wife? It didn't matter if his family and friends were not there, as long as his father-in-law was there. The ceremony was not important, but the intention was important. Qianxi didn't tell the little fellow what they were going to do today. He just said that he was going to take her for an outing, which made the little fellow very happy and excited. Qin Yongyan seemed to want to cultivate a relationship with the little fellow, so as soon as they got in the car, he let the little fellow sit on his lap and then let the little fellow climb around him. The Battling Great Wall in December was not as lively as the National Day. Because it was in the mountains, the wind was particularly strong, and the temperature was several degrees lower than that in the city. The family of 4 bought the tickets and went up the Great Wall under the astonished gazes of the staff. The weather was too cold, and there were basically no tourists on the Great Wall at this time. The bare mountains were covered with snow everywhere. The cold wind whistled past. Afraid that the child would be cold, Qianxi wrapped the little fellow with Qianxi. The most beautiful scenery on the Great Wall was in autumn. Because there were many maple trees planted in this area, in autumn, standing on the Great Wall and looking down, one would see the maple leaves below as red as fire, which could be said to reflect the ancient Great Wall. This was also a great beauty in Shangjing. So, was the Great Wall not beautiful in winter? No, no. Looking inside and outside the Great Wall, there was only luxuriant. Taizu only used such a poem to accurately summarize the beauty of the Great Wall in winter. Boundless and vigorous. Qin Yongyan held the little fellow and followed Qianxi to the beacon tower on the north 5th floor. Seeing that he stopped moving forward, she asked with a smile, "What do you want to do for your wedding? Can you tell me now?" Qianxi had been mysterious today. After hearing Qin Yongyan's words, Qin Ruoying immediately turned to look at Qianxi. She also wanted to see how Qianxi was going to hold the wedding. Hearing this, Qianxi smiled mysteriously at them, then turned and walked to the edge of the Great Wall. Immediately after, he pointed to the vast mountains covered with snow in front of him and said to Qin Ruoying with a smile, "Why do we have to hold a wedding?" "Because a wedding is not a formality, it can bring a sense of ceremony to us. A sense of ceremony can make us more deeply remember everything that is happening now. Life is dull. No matter how passionate two people are when they are in love, when they are together, it will become daily necessities and domestic affairs. Dull life always tends to wear away our edges and make us forget who we were in the beginning. That's why people try their best to think of all kinds of romantic festivals and ceremonies. They want to use the sense of ceremony to remind themselves not to forget their original intentions. Just like the saying goes, life is not just about the present, there is also poetry and the future. Since ceremonies are all thought of by people, then I can also think of a ceremony that is different from others, a ceremony that belongs only to us." Speaking of this, Qin Shi winked at Qin Ruoying, making her laugh. "Only you can do it." Perhaps because Qin Yongyan and the little guy were still next to her, Qin Ruoying's face showed a bit of a shy expression for the first time. Qin Shi did not know if he was thick-skinned or not, but in short, he completely ignored his father-in-law and focused all his attention on Qin Ruoying. At this moment, he only had eyes for her. After gazing at the lover in front of him affectionately, the love in Qin Shi's heart suddenly gushed out like spring water. He turned around and faced the mountains. Looking inside and outside the Great Wall, there was only luxuriance. Qin Shi suddenly waved his hand and motioned for Qin Ruoying to come to his side. Qin Ruoying stood beside him and glanced at the barren mountains below. She suddenly had some doubts. What was there to see in this place? At this moment, Qin Shi suddenly shouted at the mountains in front of him, "Ying, deep feelings are not as good as long-term companionship. There is no need to say more about love. Today, I will let Qingshan wear red makeup for you." As soon as his voice fell, Qin Shi suddenly stepped on the ground. The true essence that he had accumulated for 500 years burst out in an instant, crazily gushing out from his body, suddenly shaking the whole mountain range. With Qin Shi as the center, the invisible true essence continued to spread out. In an instant, it was as if the god of spring had issued an edict. Wherever the true essence reached, flowers and trees bloomed. But the most abundant thing here was not flowers, but maple trees. On the snow-covered mountains, countless bare tree trunks suddenly sprouted, and new leaves grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. Like a landscape painting that had been splashed with paint, the barren mountains in front of them were instantly dyed green. Following that, the green turned to yellow, then red, until the forest was dyed with layers of green and gold. Chapter 186. Wow, the little fellow looked at the magical scene in front of her, and her little mouth couldn't help but turn into an O shape. She sat in Qin Yongyan's arms and couldn't help but feel a little excited when she saw the fiery red leaves on the mountain. "Grandpa, Grandpa. I want to go and see. Come over a bit." The little fellow wriggled her body and signaled Qin Yongyan to take her to the edge of the city wall. She wanted to take a closer look at the bright red maple leaves that covered the whole mountain. Qin Yongyan finally came back to his senses after being shaken by her. The heavy snow had passed, and in the blink of an eye, it was the winter solstice. It was supposed to be the late winter when everything was dormant, but Qin Shi's words actually made the plants on the mountain grow in reverse. In an instant, they had sprouted, grown leaves, sprouted stems, bloomed flowers, and bore fruit. According to legend, there were immortals in ancient times whose words contained the heavenly laws. What was the difference between Qin Shi's action and that of the immortals? A moment ago, it was still a barren mountain, and the next moment, it was full of vegetation. Qin Yongyan was really shocked and inexplicably. The impact of this scene on him was even more violent than when Qin Shi killed great-granduncle. What kind of cultivation method did Qin Shi make him practice? Could it really be the immortal's inheritance? After this period of cultivation, Qin Yongyan was about to step into the late stage of qi refining, so his understanding of immortal cultivators was much deeper than before. Every realm of immortal cultivators could be divided into 3 stages: the beginning, the middle, and the end. For example, Qin Yongyan had already gone through 2 stages, the early stage of qi condensation, the middle stage of body tempering, and the late stage of aperture opening, which was about to step into. Once all the apertures were opened, then he could step into the second major realm of immortal cultivation, foundation establishment. It was also because of this that there was a huge gap between the early stage of golden core and the middle stage of golden core. Thinking of this, Qin Yongyan couldn't help but frown and silently glance at his son-in-law several times. He was now a little curious. What was Chen Shi's cultivation level? Just as Qin Yongyan was blindly pondering, the little fellow in his arms suddenly giggled. The child didn't understand so much. She only knew that the scenery in front of her was very beautiful, so she wrapped one arm around Qin Yongyan's neck and pointed at the maple leaves below the city wall with the other hand. She kept muttering that it was so beautiful. The mountain full of maple leaves facing the morning sun, the green mountain for you in red makeup. Chen Shi's ceremony was so shocking that Qin Ruoying held her lover's hand tightly and didn't come back to her senses for a long time. Due to the presence of his father-in-law, Chen Shi did not do anything too intimate. He gently squeezed Qin Ruoying's delicate hand, then turned to look at his lover and asked with a smile, "What do you think? Do you like it?" The cold winter wind whistled past. Qin Ruoying's red lips slightly opened as she muttered, "I like, as long as you like it." Chen Shi smiled and didn't say anything else. It was just as he had said. Deep feelings were not as good as long-term companionship. This was the truth of the world. 20 minutes later, the family of 4 left the Great Wall. At this time, many local residents who heard the news had gathered at the ticket office at the foot of the mountain, ready to go up the mountain to see what was going on. This place was 1,000 meters above sea level. Even if it was a sunny day, the temperature was far below zero. The mountain full of maple trees bloomed in this season of frost. It could be said that the rain hit the pine trees green, and the frost dyed the maple leaves red. It was a wonderful scene. If nothing unexpected happened, this supernatural phenomenon would cause a sensation in the country in half an hour, and even attract the attention of foreign media. There was no ceremony, no guests, and even the most common bowing to heaven and earth, then to parents, and then to husband and wife. Chen Shi naturally called out, "Dad," which made Qin Yongyan and Qin Ruoying laugh. The little girl didn't know why her mother and grandfather were so happy, but when she saw that they were happy, she was also very happy. She lay on Qin Yongyan's shoulder and kept giggling. When they went home, the family of 4 didn't go directly home. Instead, they went to Quanzhou to treat the little girl to a meal of authentic Shangjing roast duck. When it came to eating roast duck, the duck leg was obviously the child's favorite part. In order to make it easier for the little girl to eat, Qin Ruoying specifically told the waiter not to keep the duck leg for her. After the dishes were served, the little girl proudly held a duck leg in each hand and gnawed on it until her mouth was full of oil. Today, the 2 brothers weren't around. The little girl bit the duck leg and suddenly remembered her other little friend, Big Cat. Recently, the little girl didn't disturb the big cat, so it was happy to be free. Moreover, it was allowed by Chen Shi to stay at home and practice all day long like Qin Ruoying. It didn't even need to go out. It was very leisurely all day long. They were sitting in a private room with a TV in it. As expected, during the afternoon news, Shangjing TV station broadcasted a special interview about the wonders of Ba De Ling. It could only be said that the response was really fast. They even specially invited 2 professors from Tsinghua University, a botanist and a meteorologist. Perhaps it was because some departments had informed them in advance, so the 2 experts explained the reasons for the audience in front of the TV from a scientific point of view. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying knocked on Chen Shi's bowl with his chopsticks. It seemed that he wanted Chen Shi to see what he had just done. Chen Shi smiled and didn't take it to heart. The movement he made seemed spectacular, but in fact, it could only last for a short period of time. At the latest, the flowers and trees would all wither and go dormant the day after tomorrow. They would only be rejuvenated when spring came. Compared with the Taklamakan Desert becoming an oasis, it was simply dwarfed. Just take it as a warning to the people of the country in advance. If they saw any strange scenes in the future, they wouldn't be so surprised. After lunch, the family returned to the courtyard. The little girl specially left a duck leg for the big cat. As soon as she got home, she rushed to the main hall. Big cat. Big cat. Where are you? I'll treat you to a duck leg. Meow, the sound came from the roof. The little girl looked up and found that the big cat had actually jumped onto the roof beam. As soon as it saw the duck leg in the little girl's hand, it immediately jumped down from the roof beam and then circled around the little girl, wagging its tail. This guy was also a foodie. The duck leg was cold, but it didn't mind at all. Eat slowly. I'll give it all to you. The little girl touched the big cat's hair and said to it earnestly. Xianxia stood in the courtyard. After hearing what the little girl said to the big cat, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. The big cat had lived for many years, but now it was being treated as a child younger than it was by a 4-year-old child. The little girl was taking care of the big cat. This scene looked inexplicably harmonious. It was already afternoon, so they didn't go to the tea house today. Xianxia accompanied the little girl to watch cartoons in the West Wing, and Qin Ruoying went to the East Wing to cultivate. The recovery of spiritual power was something Xianxia had never experienced before. So even he didn't know what kind of changes it would bring to the world. However, Xianxia speculated that the recovery of spiritual power would first affect the natural environment. After the environment changed, flowers and plants would also be affected. Then it would affect birds and animals, until it affected humans. How long this recovery of spiritual power would last and how long this evolution process would take were still unknown. Chapter 187. There was nothing to talk about these days. In a flash, it was the beginning of January. There were 3 hottest days in summer and 3 coldest days in winter. The third 9 days after the winter solstice was also the coldest time of the year. Because it was winter, ice had already formed in Hohai before the end of the 3rd and 9th day. Now that the lake was frozen, the anticipated ice skating rink was about to open. This was a big event that would be on the news. After the news was broadcast, Hohai, which was deserted a few days ago, finally ushered in the most lively time of the winter. After breakfast, Xianxia had just walked out of Dongming Alley with the little fellow when a burst of lively noise came from afar. Just like going to the countryside to go to the market, the father and daughter turned the corner and came to the street outside the tea house, only to find that a lot of people suddenly appeared on the lakeside of Hohai. As the holy land of skating in the eyes of the old Shangjing people, once the Shikahai ice rink opened, even if they lived outside the 3rd ring road, they would still come to play. This was the feeling. Because they were poor in the past, there were not so many entertainment projects. Swimming in summer and skating in winter naturally became the first choice of entertainment for the people. The little fellow was stunned. When they left yesterday, there was not even a ghost here. How did this place become as lively as a market in just one night? Looking around, the lakeside of Hohai was already full of red lanterns, and very festive music was playing in the ice rink. It was as if there was going to be a festival, and the atmosphere was very festive. It was now 9:00 in the morning. When the father and daughter walked into the tea house, the ice rink was not open yet, so most of the people were concentrated on the streets on both sides of the lake. The staff of the Sports Bureau, the Public Security Bureau, the Safety Supervision Bureau and other departments were conducting ice testing inspection on the Shikahai ice rink. After the inspection, the Shikahai ice rink could officially open for business. Xianxia had just hung the "Open for Business" sign when 2 young people with ice skates came in. Boss, 2 cups of vegetarian tea. The ice testing inspection generally took about 2 hours. The young people did not want to stand outside in the cold wind, so they came in. There was heating in the tea house, so it was very warm and comfortable as soon as they came in. In addition, Xianxia would light an incense when he had nothing to do, so the smell in the tea house became very good, so it gave people a feeling that they did not want to go out again. Because he had to boil the water, it took him nearly 20 minutes to brew the first pot of tea. Just as he delivered the 2 cups of tea to the young man, the tea house welcomed a new customer. There were 5 or 6 guests, men and women, old and young. It was obvious that they were a big family. This was the earliest day of business since Xianxia took over the tea house. It could only be said that the peak season came too suddenly. The little girl sat in the children's playground, looking at the guests who kept coming in. Her little face was full of surprise. She was very sensible. When she saw that Xianxia was alone, he had to greet the guests and pour tea for them. The little fellow took the initiative to run to Xianxia's side. She raised her head and said sweetly, "Papa. Let me help you." "Good girl." Xianxia smiled and stroked the little fellow's head. Then, he handed a cup of green tea to her and said, "Come on, give it to that uncle, and then to sister. Be careful, don't fall." Yeah. The little fellow nodded like she was pounding garlic. Then, she carefully took the teacup in Xianxia's hand. Because she was afraid of spilling the tea, the little fellow straightened her back and her whole little face became serious. The guests were a young couple. After the little fellow put the teacup on the guest's table, she smiled sweetly and said, "Uncle, have some tea." The young man, who was estimated to be in his 20s, was stunned by her calling him uncle. Before he could come back to his senses, the little girl had already run back to the bar counter and brought over another cup of tea. "Sister, have some tea." The two guests were obviously a couple. As a result, the little fellow called the man uncle and the woman sister, which immediately made them laugh. "This child is so cute." "Yes, why don't we have a child?" "Get out." The guests came one after another without stopping. So, just after 10 o'clock, the tea house was already full. The little fellow sat on Xianxia's lap and put her head on the bar. Her big round eyes kept scanning the tea house lobby in front of her, and she couldn't help giggling. "Papa. Business is good today." The business was good, and the little fellow was very proud, so she didn't go to the children's playground today. Instead, she sat at the bar and waited for the guests to greet her. Whenever she heard a customer shouting for more water, the little girl would run over with a small water bottle in her arms. To her, this kind of menial task of pouring tea was more fun than stacking blocks. According to his usual habits, Gu Lao usually came to the tea house after 11 o'clock. It was estimated that he also knew the news of the opening of the Shikai skating rink today, so he came much earlier than usual. As soon as the two brothers entered the door, they were immediately stunned by the lively scene in front of them. Here. As soon as she saw her friends coming, the little fellow excitedly waved to the two brothers. There were no seats in the tea house, so Xianxia asked Gu Lao to sit behind the bar, and the three little guys went back to their exclusive children's playground. About half an hour later, someone suddenly shouted, "The ice rink is open." This sentence was like throwing a match into a pile of explosives, causing a violent reaction in an instant. The guests asked Xianxia to pay the bill. As soon as he reported a number, before he walked out of the bar, the guests had taken the initiative to give him the money and then quickly walked out of the tea house. In less than 10 minutes, the tea house, which was full of guests just now, was deserted again, leaving only countless empty teacups and melon seed shells on the ground. Seeing this, Gu Lao called out the three little guys and then arranged work for them. The elder brother wiped the table, the younger brother swept the floor, and the little one was responsible for setting the chairs. After cleaning up the tea house, Xianxia calculated the income of this morning. In less than 2 hours, the tea house had earned 1,500 yuan. Today was also the only profitable day since he took over the tea house. After calculating the account, without waiting for the three little guys to speak, Gu Lao asked with a smile, "I'm old and can't run anymore. Why don't you take them out to play, and I'll guard the shop for you?" Hearing this, Xianxia glanced at the three little guys who were lying by the window and watching the fun, and said with a smile, "Okay, then you have a good rest here, and I'll take them out to play." Why was the tea house doing well? Because not far from the door was the fourth entrance of the Shikai ice rink. The total area of the Shikai ice rink was as high as 160,000 square meters, and there were as many as 10 ice entertainment projects. In addition to the traditional ice skating, there were also ice bicycles, ice motorcycles, ice slides, ice hockey, ice bumper cars, and so on. In addition, according to the area, the Shikahai ice rink was also divided into a free entertainment area, a comprehensive skating area, an ice hockey area, a speed skating area, an ice golf area, an ice bed passage, and a special children's entertainment area. How could the small artificial ice rink in the shopping mall be comparable to such a huge skating rink? As soon as they entered the ice rink, Qianxi rented an ice car for the three little guys. The so-called ice car was actually a simple sleigh with a row of iron stools welded on two iron bars. Qianxi sat in the front, and the three little guys sat behind him. After shouting, "Take off," Qianxi took two thin iron bars and kept drawing on the ground. Just like a boatman paddling, as he slid hard, he suddenly pulled the three little guys on the ice. Chapter 188. Ice carts were a common entertainment in winter in the north, but they were rare in the south. Many southerners probably hadn't even seen what ice carts looked like. The so-called ice carts were actually invented to allow people who didn't know how to skate to experience the fun of ice skating. The three little guys played for a while. When they saw people constantly passing by them on ice skates, their interest was aroused. Thus, they were no longer satisfied with the ice carts and clamored for Qianxi to teach them how to skate. Learning to skate was actually similar to learning to swim. Some people could learn it in an hour or two, while others couldn't learn it in a week or two. Seeing that the three little guys were so enthusiastic, Qianxi couldn't persuade them, so he rented 3 pairs of ice skates for them and took them to the skating area. Ice skates were a very magical thing in the eyes of the little guy. After Qianxi helped her put on the skates, she couldn't help but touch the ice skates under the skates. Then, she kicked her little feet and scraped a layer of ice on the ground with the ice skates. Looking at her smug look, she was probably very happy in her heart. After Qianxi drove the ice carts to the skating area with the 3 little guys, the little guy eagerly wanted to get off the ice carts. Newborn calves were not afraid of tigers. The little guy didn't care so much and wanted to stand up directly when she stepped on the ice. Children who were just over 4 years old could suddenly fall down while walking on the road, let alone on ice. Sure enough, just as the little guy stood up from the ice carts, her right foot suddenly slipped and her small body suddenly fell backward. At such a critical moment, naturally, he had to act as a father. Qianxi was also prepared. As soon as the little girl fell down, he had already reached his hand behind the little girl's back and helped her stand up again. This scared the little guy. After holding Qianxi's arm and standing firm, she didn't dare to let go. Trying to scrape her feet on the ground twice, the little guy shouted at Qianxi with a frightened face, "Papa! I can't stand up." Before Qianxi could reply, the brothers sitting on the ice carts immediately responded, "Grandpa said that ice is very slippery. That's why we can't stand on the ice. You have to hold on to something." The 2 brothers grew up in Hohai, so they had come here to play a long time ago. However, at this time last year, they were only 3 years old. It was obviously impossible for Gu Lao to teach them to skate. The 2 brothers had been longing for ice skating for a long time. Looking at her brother's serious face, Qianxi couldn't help but laugh. "Come, Nian Nian, come here. Daddy will support you." After holding the little fellow's hand and standing on the ice, Qianxi slowly dragged her to his side. Then, he turned to the brothers and said, "You 2 stay in the car. Uncle will teach your sister how to skate first, okay?" "All right." The 2 brothers nodded and then sat on the ice carriage obediently, watching the little guy carefully step forward under Qianxi's guidance. Skating was actually a kind of muscle memory. No matter how good a skater was, if they hadn't skated for decades, they might fall when they stepped on the ice again. Children learn things very quickly. Under normal circumstances, Qianxi should be able to teach the little fellow to skate in an afternoon. However, because there were still 2 brothers waiting in line, Qianxi could only give the little fellow a cheat. He first let the little fellow try to learn how to stand on the ice. Then, the little fellow raised her hands and let Qianxi hold her hands from above. With Qianxi's help, the little fellow quickly adapted to the feeling of standing on the ice. After she adapted, Qianxi said softly, "Nian Nian, be good. Daddy will support you." Slowly move forward. Look, just like that, uncle, move. Although her father was next to her, the little fellow was still very afraid that she would suddenly fall. She held her hand and patiently encouraged her several times. Then, the little fellow carefully tried to take a step forward. Very good. Now we have to learn from that uncle and let ourselves float. In the eyes of outsiders, they were a pair of father and daughter who were learning to skate. But in fact, at this moment, the little fellow's whole body was wrapped in Qianxi's true essence. As soon as the little fellow took a step forward, Qianxi used his true essence to push her into a standard posture. She thought that her father was pushing her, so she didn't care. After trying to walk forward for a short while, the little fellow began to get used to it. After Qianxi took her around the ice car a few times, the nervous expression on the little fellow's face finally disappeared. It seemed to be very simple. She was so happy that she began to be carried away again, so she immediately shouted, "Papa, let go of me. I'll do it myself." Learning to skate required confidence. This was a good thing, so Qianxi quickly let go of her hand. The little fellow silently felt for a moment. After finding that the feeling was still there, she began to skate forward by herself. At first, she walked very slowly, probably because she was afraid that she would fall. But under the guidance of Qianxi's true essence, the little fellow found that no matter how she walked, she would not lose her center of gravity. So she took a step forward and directly ran on the ice. It was not right to say that she was running, because she was using a standard posture. Her body was slightly bent, her center of gravity was shifted forward, and she kept stepping on the ice to move forward. In fact, she was now like learning to ride a children's bicycle. Because the rear wheel was equipped with 2 balance pulleys, no matter how fast she rode, the bicycle would not overturn. Oh, the 2 brothers who were watching by the side had such expressions on their faces. Looking at the little fellow who was flying on the ice, they were completely stunned. Was learning to skate really so easy? How long had their sister been learning? How could she run so fast? Thinking of this, the elder brother stood up from the ice car excitedly, ready to learn by himself. However, he was the same as the little fellow at the beginning. Just as he took a step forward, his whole body suddenly fell backward. If it wasn't for Qianxi pulling him back in time, it was estimated that her brother would have fallen hard. Come, don't worry. Uncle will teach you. Little by little, Qianxi held the elder brother in one hand and the younger brother in the other. According to what he had taught the little fellow just now, after they had learned to stand firm, Qianxi led them slowly forward. After they had adapted, Qianxi followed suit. He wrapped them with true essence and let them skate by themselves. In less than half an hour, the 3 little fellows, who could not even stand firm at the beginning, were now able to run unscrupulously on the ice skating field. Of course, their flying state was fake. They were just cheating. Qianxi used true essence to correct their movements. After they formed muscle memory, the 3 little fellows really learned to skate. Chapter 189. Today, the 3 little guys could be considered to be free. With the help of Qianxi's buff, they circled the skating area again and again. The only thing they didn't do was show off a wave of figure skating. Children of 4 or 5 years old skating so well naturally attracted the attention of many people. So after they played for a while, many people in the skating area knew them. What's more, they even took out their mobile phones to take small videos of them. The incessant cheers from the onlookers made the 3 little fellows extremely proud. Many children saw that they were so good, and they all clamored to learn to skate. However, when their parents put on the skates for them, these children couldn't even stand steadily, and they would suddenly fall down if they weren't careful. Although it didn't hurt much because of the thick winter clothes, it was a big psychological blow to the children. Why can others run so fast, but they can't even stand? Seeing others in such a sorry state, the 3 little guys were very proud, and their self-confidence was about to burst. Among the children in the world, they were the smartest. It was rare to see the 3 little guys so proud, so Qianxi didn't expose them, but let their self-confidence inflate. However, there was an obvious drawback to this. The three little guys were so immersed in playing that they didn't even want to eat lunch. Under Qinshi's repeated shouts, they reluctantly skated over, and then returned to the tea house to prepare for lunch. With the opening of the Shikahai skating rink, the nearby shops would also welcome the peak season. The tea house's business was really good today. Many guests who were tired from playing in the ice rink would go to the tea house to sit and rest for a while. This was only the first day of the ice rink's opening, so although there were many people, it was far from the peak. In a few days, when it was winter 39th, the Shikahai skating rink would really usher in the peak of the flow of people. At that time, the tea house would probably be full all day. The so-called 3 years of not opening, but opening to eat for 3 years, is probably the meaning of this. After lunch, the three little guys clamored to go out to play again. They were so energetic that they didn't seem like 4 or 5 years old children. Qianxia wanted them to take a rest, take a nap in the tea house, and go out to play in the afternoon. But the three little guys didn't agree at all. The little fellow even ran behind Qianxia and pushed him from behind, trying to push him out of the tea house. The two brothers each held one of his hands and insisted that Qianxia take them to the ice rink to play. Since she was already acting like a spoiled child, Qianxia had no choice but to agree. Just as they were about to head to the ice rink again, an old acquaintance entered the tea house. It was still Qiao Yuan. But today, she came alone. She was also dragging a suitcase. It looked like she had brought all her belongings with her. The northern schools started their winter break earlier than the southern schools, so Qiao Yuan's school had already started their winter break at the beginning of January. Instead of going home, she wanted to work part-time in the tea house. Well, as long as you provide food and shelter, you don't need to be paid. Qianxi's family didn't seem to be short of money, so Qiao Yuan wanted to thank Qianxia in this way. In this regard, Father Qiao didn't have any objections. He just told her not to fall behind on her homework, and the rest was up to her. Qianxia saw her determined look, as if she wouldn't leave if he didn't agree, so he had no choice but to agree. Anyway, there was still more than a month before the new year, so he let her stay here for a month. The business of the tea house was estimated to improve a lot during this time, so having an extra person would save him a lot of trouble. As for the salary, he would pay it when the time came. But then again, the work of the tea house was really easy. She only needed to serve tea to the guests, and after the guests left, she would simply clean up. She didn't need Qianxia to teach her. Qiao Yuan sat down at the bar and directly started. Seeing that Qianxia suddenly hired a waiter, old Gu was happy to be free, so he sat in the lobby and watched TV. The three little guys waited obediently by the side. After Qianxia finished explaining to Qiao Yuan, they swarmed up again and tried to drag Qianxia out of the door. Qianxia was a little uncomfortable to suddenly become the leader of the children. After laughing and patting their heads, he opened the door of the tea house with the naughty little guys. However, just as Qianxia walked out of the tea house, he bumped into two men in suits. Hohai was a residential area, not a central business district. Therefore, it was rare to see pedestrians dressed in business here. As soon as he saw these two men, the smile on Qianxia's face disappeared and turned into a cold face. Because these two men were not ordinary people, but at least masters who had reached the level of covert power. Obviously, they were here for him. Sure enough, Qianxia just walked out of the tea house with the three little guys, and the two men directly came to him. Mr. Qian, hello, one of them smiled and greeted Qianxia, then handed out a business card and wanted to introduce himself. But at this time, Qianxia didn't even give him a chance to speak. After coldly glancing at the two men, Qianxia took the three little guys directly to the skating rink. The man in the suit was inexplicably met with a soft rebuff. Seeing Qianxia swagger away with the children, they whispered to each other. It was impossible to chase after them. Since the other party put on such a posture, it was obvious that he didn't want to have too much contact with them, so after the two men discussed for a while, they turned around and walked into the tea house. They had to at least find an opportunity to explain to the other party why they were here. But in fact, Qianxia had already guessed their intentions. After all, how sharp was his eyesight? Although he didn't take the business card, with a casual glance, Xianxia still saw the name of the company on the business card, Concord Corporation, and a series of Japanese words that he didn't recognize. Concord Corporation was the name of Japan, which was actually a company limited by shares of Wuxia. Japanese? Their Mandarin was indeed very standard, so just by looking at their appearance, it was impossible to tell that they were Japanese. In addition, these two men were also martial arts masters, and had reached the level of covert power. To be honest, Xianxia would rather chat with the aunties selling vegetables on the street for half an hour than talk to any martial arts masters for a minute. The former was for living, the latter was to destroy his life. Not to mention that the other party was Japanese. Before Xianxia left the earth, the relationship between China and Japan was getting more and more tense because of the Diaoyu Island incident. A few years had passed, probably because the relationship between China and Japan had improved significantly, so some people who didn't learn from their mistakes had emerged again. Speaking of which, where did the Wu Lian people go? The Japanese were already in front of him, but the Wu Lian didn't send anyone to stop them. Chapter 190. Xianxia didn't take the two Japanese seriously at all. They were merely at the peak of concealing power. They couldn't even beat the big cat. Naturally, they were nothing to worry about. In the afternoon, the three little guys were not so enthusiastic about ice skating. Children were a little bit fond of the new and tired of the old. Perhaps because they thought they had learned it, after playing for a while, they began to wander around and came to the ice hockey area. Ice hockey was a recently popular ice game in Shangjing. This game was born 300 years ago during the Qianlong period, flourished during the Republic of China period, and gradually disappeared in the 1980s and 1990s. A few years ago, after the successful bid of the Winter Olympics in Shangjing, this long-established ice sport with both competitive and recreational characteristics, was promoted by the government and flourished in Shangjing again. The game of ice hockey was very similar to curling, but more competitive. The field was a rectangle of 12 meters long and 2 meters wide. One end was red, the other was blue. The center of the field was a circular scoring area. The game was very simple. Each side had 5 balls. The red team started first. Like curling, they pushed their red ball to the center of the circular area and occupied the most central position. When it was the blue team's turn, except for the first ball that couldn't hit the red team's ball, the other 4 balls could hit the red team's ball. Because the friction on the ice was very small, the ice ball could slide far away if it was hit slightly. The core of the game was to hit the opponent's ball and let your own ball stay in the central scoring area. After the 5 balls were hit, the score was calculated according to the scoring area occupied. Whoever had the highest score would win. It's like playing marbles. Simple. I know how to play. After Xianxia briefly explained the game to the 3 little guys, they immediately jumped up in excitement. She was now a master of marbles, and the 2 brothers played with her more often than not. After listening to Xianxia's explanation, the little guys suddenly felt that this game was similar to marbles. They couldn't help but be eager to try. The ice hockey area was very large, and many fields had been drawn on the ground. Xianxia took them to randomly choose a field, and the 3 little guys used rock-paper-scissors to decide who would play first. Rock-paper-scissors had never been the elder brother's strength, so he lost without any suspense. The little guy and the younger brother played first. She was on the red team, so she started first. How could a child know so much, so the little guy didn't even consider how much strength he should use. He kicked the red ball right in front of his younger brother, which made the 2 brothers laugh out loud. Xianxia shook his head as he watched. The little fellow pouted, looking unhappy. Seeing this, Xianxia squatted beside her. After reaching out and pinching her little face, Xianxia said to the little fellow, "Nian Nian, this is ice. Ice is very slippery, so you have to be gentle and control your strength. Let the ball just slide to the middle." As he spoke, he gently pushed out a red ball as a demonstration. The red ball stopped at the center of the 5-point zone. The little girl was so shocked that she opened her mouth and clapped her hands excitedly. "Papa is so awesome. Papa is so awesome. It didn't matter if he wasn't powerful, as long as his father was. Xianxia stood up, rubbed the little fellow's head, and let the two brothers try their strength. After they had adapted to how much strength they should use, the ice hockey game began again. The reason why this game could become popular overnight was mainly because it was easy to learn and could be played by men and women, old and young. The three little guys had experience playing marbles, so they learned it at once. Seeing that they were playing back and forth, Xianxia watched the game with a smile. There were too many entertainment projects in the Shikai skating rink. After they were tired of ice hockey, Xianxia also took them to play ice bumper cars, ice motorcycles, and other projects. After they played one by one, it was 5:00 in the afternoon. At 5:00, the sky was already dark, and the outdoor lights around the skating rink were turned on one after another. The Shikai skating rink had a night show, and it would be open until 10:00 in the evening. The amusement park was right outside their home. For the children, what could be happier than this? The two brothers had already played overtime today. It was estimated that they were also afraid of being scolded by their grandpa, so when they heard Xianxia say that it was time to go back, they immediately stopped, and then took the initiative to take the little fellow, who was still unwilling to leave, out of the skating rink. When Xianxia returned to the tea house with the three little guys, there were still several tables in the tea house. Xiao Yuan also did her duty as a waiter. As soon as she saw Xianxia enter the door, she quickly ran over, handed him the business card, and said, "Boss, two guests just left a business card for you, saying that they want to talk to you. They hope you can call them back." "Okay, I see." Xianxia nodded. After taking the business card, he didn't even look at it and directly threw it into the trash can next to him. Seeing Xiao Yuan's surprised face, he didn't explain. Instead, he smiled and said, "Clean up. We should close." "What about the guests?" "Tell them we're closing." "Oh, okay." Since the boss said so, Xiao Yuan had to apologize to the guests at each table. Although the guests were a little confused, they didn't react too violently. But looking at them frowning and leaving, it was estimated that they wouldn't come again in the future. It couldn't be helped. The boss was so capricious that he didn't do business. While Xiao Yuan was still busy cleaning up, Gu Lao took the two brothers to say goodbye to Xianxia. "Sister, goodbye. I'll come and play with you tomorrow." "Okay. Goodbye." The little girl stood beside Xianxia and waved her little hand at the two brothers reluctantly. After the brothers also left under Gu Lao's lead, the tea house returned to calm. After simply cleaning up the tea house, Xianxia said to Xiao Yuan, "Let's go, we should go home." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan was a little surprised and asked, "Go home? What else? Do you still want to go back to school?" No, I can live in the tea house. Can people live in this place?" "Let's go, there are many empty rooms in the courtyard. You can live in one." Xiao Yuan was still hesitating. But at this time, the little fellow suddenly grinned and said, "Sister, stay in our house. Our house is very big. We can play hide and seek." Perhaps the little fellow's persuasion had worked. So after thinking about it, Xiao Yuan nodded heavily and said, "Then I'll bother you." "It's okay, let's go." The tea house was closed, but the Shikai skating rink opposite was still very lively. The little fellow lay on Xianxia's shoulder and kept turning her head to look at the tourists inside. Looking at her little eyes, she probably wanted to go in and play for a while. Xiao Yuan pulled the suitcase and silently followed behind the father and daughter. Passing through Dongming Alley, just as she walked into the courtyard, she was shocked by the spacious courtyard in front of her. To have such a big courtyard in Shangjing, the boss's family was really rich. Xianxia didn't know what Xiao Yuan was thinking. He just stepped into the front yard with Xiao Yuan, and the door of the east wing was pushed open. Then, Qin Shueqing came out of the room. Chapter 191. When Xiao Yuan saw Qin Shueqing walk out from the east wing, she was shocked by her beauty. Xiao Yuan knew Qin Ruoying, but she had never seen Qin Shueqing before. The two sisters didn't look alike. The only thing they had in common was probably their beauty. If they were to be compared to flowers, then Qin Ruoying was obviously a noble and elegant peony, while Qin Shueqing was a snow lotus blooming on the peak of Tian Shan Mountain. The former was approachable, while the latter was unapproachable. Compared to them, Xiao Yuan was like the most common wild chrysanthemum by the roadside. Her sister-in-law's aura was too strong, like a sword that was about to be unsheathed at any time. That scared the little girl. Even though Qin didn't turn around, he could feel the uneasiness coming from Xiao Yuan. Therefore, after a simple greeting to Qin Shueqing, Qin brought Xiao Yuan directly to the west wing. There were 3 rooms in each wing, but the middle one was slightly bigger than the other 2. You can stay here. There's a bathroom in the room, hot water, heating, and so on. But you have to bring your own toiletries. I already brought them, okay, then you can pack up first. I'll call you when it's time to eat later. Okay. Thank you, boss. After explaining to Xiao Yuan, Qin carried the little girl out of her room. At this time, Qin Ruoying heard the commotion outside, so she walked out of the west wing. The moment she walked out, she saw Qin Shueqing opposite her. Qin Shueqing was wearing a windbreaker today, which covered both her arms. However, the empty sleeve on the right seemed to be telling him something. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but have a complicated expression on her face. She knew her sister's character very well, so she didn't say anything to comfort her. Instead, she smiled naturally and said, "Yuqing, you're back." A seemingly normal greeting made Qin Shueqing's expression melt like an iceberg, and she smiled for the first time. "Yes, I just came back." When Qin carried the little girl out of the room, the sisters were greeting each other. The little girl turned her head and saw Qin Ruoying. Seeing her mother next to her, the little girl couldn't help but shout excitedly, "Mama! Mama!" Seeing this, Qin quickly put her down. Then, the little girl called for her mother while running toward Qin Ruoying. Hearing the little girl's cry, Qin Ruoying hurriedly crouched down and hugged her in her arms. "Hey, Nian, did you have fun today?" "Yes." "Mama, do you want to go ice skating with us?" "It's so fun." "No, Mommy still has to study. Otherwise, Daddy will get angry." Hearing this, the little girl couldn't help but pout as looking back at Qin. She whispered, "Papa is so stingy." After hearing this silly child's complaint, the couple couldn't help but smile at each other. Then they couldn't help but laugh. The sister-in-law stood on the steps outside the east wing, silently watching the family of 3 show off their love. She didn't come here to stand in the cold wind and pose. Looking at this posture, she probably had something to say to Qin. Therefore, after letting the little girl wave to Qin Shueqing, Qin Ruoying carried the little girl back to the room, and Qin came to Qin Shueqing. Since she was his sister-in-law, Qin didn't need to beat around the bush with her, so he asked directly, "Why did you suddenly come back? Is it because of the 2 islanders who came to find me today?" "Yes, they are from Yinyang Liao." "Oh, ninjas?" "No, they are Yinyang masters." "Yinyang masters? What's that?" "You don't know?" "Why should I know?" Qin replied matter-of-factly, which made Qin Shueqing look at him in surprise. After all, in Qin Shueqing's opinion, Qin was an alchemist with a high cultivation base. In terms of strength, he was probably stronger than Su Fu, so there was no reason for him not to know the origin of the Yinyang masters. The so-called Yinyang masters were actually a variant of the alchemist lineage. Legend had it that after Su Fu left with 3,000 boys and girls, because he couldn't find the immortal medicine and was afraid of being punished by Qin Shi Huang, he simply fled to Japan to reproduce and become the divine emperor of Japan. It was hard to say whether Su Fu was the divine emperor of Japan or not. However, what was certain was that Su Fu must have gone to Japan back then and brought technology and culture to the Japanese, allowing the Japanese civilization to advance by leaps and bounds. In an instant, they had stepped into the Bronze Age from the Stone Age. Therefore, even until now, many places in Japan still had legends about Su Fu. There was even a Su Fu Park in Shingon City. As for the other shrines, tombs, and stone tablets that worshipped Su Fu, they were even more common. As the strongest alchemist of the Qin dynasty, after Su Fu's death, his legacy was naturally passed down in Japan. This was the origin of the Yin-Yang Masters. After Qin Shueqing briefly explained the origin of the Yin-Yang Masters, Qin Shi nodded thoughtfully and then asked, "What is Yin-Yang Liao?" Yin-Yang Liao is backed by the government. You can think of it as the Wu Lian of Japan. I see, he nodded and immediately had an answer in his heart. Qin Shueqing looked at Qin Shi's expression and couldn't help but frown. She hesitated for a moment and then suddenly asked, "Did you notice something? Can you tell me?" Her sister-in-law was very humble. It seemed that she was sincerely asking for advice. However, when Qin Shi heard her words, she didn't seem to understand. She opened her mouth and asked, Tell you what? Don't tell me you don't know about the phenomena during this period. I keep feeling that something big is going to happen. You're thinking too much. I don't have the ability to read fortunes." Qin Shi smiled and casually gave an excuse. Qin Wanqing would only be able to sense the spirit qi of heaven and earth when she reached at least the latter stage of qi refinement, which was the aperture opening state. The spirit qi revival wasn't the end of the world. It wouldn't be like the outbreak of the biochemical virus that caused monsters to run rampant. For mortals, the spirit qi revival only made their body condition better. The ones who were truly affected were martial artists and necromancers. Especially the latter. Qin Shi hadn't come into contact with the inheritance of necromancers, but from Qin Shueqing's description, the direction of necromancers' cultivation should be somewhat similar to that of immortal cultivators. It was probably because the spirit qi on earth was too sparse, so the celestial being was the limit of necromancers. The so-called cultivation was actually more like evolution. The environment would limit the evolution of creatures. For example, the temperature during the Cretaceous period was 9 to 12 degrees higher than now, and the oxygen content of the atmosphere was several times higher than now. These conditions were conducive to the growth of creatures, which was why prehistoric creatures could grow so huge. Even insects at that time grew bigger than humans. Why didn't Qin Shi seize the time to cultivate? It was because in the current situation on Earth, the celestial being was the limit. He could slowly recover his strength through accumulation, but if he wanted to go further, it was almost impossible. Unless... Chapter 192. Earth became the heavenly jade realm. It sounded simple, but in reality? No matter how fast the recovery of spirit qi was, it was obviously impossible to turn a planet in the age of chaos into a holy land for cultivation in an instant. This was a process that had been accumulating over time. As for how much time this process would take, no one could say for sure. Some time ago, Qin Shi made such a big commotion in Meimen that many people knew of his existence. A celestial who did not belong to any organization and suddenly appeared out of nowhere naturally attracted the interest of all forces. Therefore, Yin-Yang Liao of Japan tried to contact Qin Shi and tried to extend an olive branch to him. Those two Japanese were Japanese businessmen who were doing legitimate business in Shangjing, so Wu Lian could not take any coercive measures against them. Wu Lian naturally would not sit back and do nothing. Therefore, he hurriedly called Qin Shueqing back, wanting to observe Qin Shi's attitude through her. After all, at the level of a celestial, the concept of a country was already very vague. For example, when great-granduncles stepped into the celestial realm, Wuxia had not yet been established. Such an old antique naturally would not have any deep feelings for this country. On this point, Wu Lian misunderstood Qin Shi. Qin Shi had received 9 years of compulsory education and 4 years of undergraduate study in university. He was an outstanding young man of the new era. When he was in university, he was a real patriotic young man. Qin Shi had always believed that one should not forget one's ancestors, so even if he went to Heavenly Jade for 500 years, after coming back, he did not do anything illegal. Well, Zhao Yuan's matter did not count. Qin Shueqing was very dissatisfied with Qin Shi's perfunctory response. She frowned slightly, looked deeply at Qin Shi, and then said coldly, "If you don't want to say it, then forget it." After that, Qin Shueching turned and went back to the east wing. It seemed that sister-in-law was angry. Qin Shi shook his head helplessly, then turned and walked to the kitchen. He still had to make dinner for the little fellow. It was not that Qin Shi was deliberately keeping her in suspense. It was just that with Qin Shueching's current cultivation level, she really could not understand the recovery of spiritual energy. If he wanted her to understand, Qin Shi would have to explain the existence of cultivators to her in detail. Instead of going through so much trouble, he might as well let his sister-in-law cultivate on her own. In any case, she would be able to step into the foundation establishment stage very soon. When that time came, she would naturally be able to clearly sense the changes in this world, as well as the effects of spirit qi on cultivators. Why is Yinyang Liao from Japan looking for Qin Shi? It was all because he had exposed his strength in Meimen, allowing many major powers to discover the existence of a celestial. The so-called celestial being was probably between foundation establishment and gold core. Because he had not condensed his golden core, he had only just broken through the foundation establishment stage and touched the threshold of the golden core stage. Regardless of whether he was a martial artist or a necromancer, as long as he reached this stage, he must have accumulated enough vital essence and opened up all the apertures in his body. At this stage, he already had a certain understanding of the heavenly Tao, so he only needed to take one more step forward to condense the three flowers, refine his golden core, and truly step into the golden core stage. Although the celestial being was powerful, for them, the earth was a boundless desert. They stood at the highest point in the world, only to find that they were lost in the desert. They could not find the direction and did not know where they should go. The recovery of spiritual energy was like an oasis that suddenly appeared in the desert, guiding them in the direction to continue moving forward. Forward. Forward again. The pure land was in front of them. Large-scale organizations with national backgrounds like Wu Lian and Yinyang Liao must have celestial being in charge. In the past, the celestial being could not find the way and could only wait for death silently. Now that there was a way, the little mind that had been dead for a long time naturally became active again. Strengthen your own strength and prepare for the coming great era. This was the awareness that every large organization should have. Therefore, a wild crane like Qin Shi became a delicious cake in the eyes of various forces. During dinner, Qin Shi called a few times, but his sister-in-law did not come out. She was probably angry. Therefore, Qin Shi no longer cared about her. Anyway, she would naturally know to go to the kitchen to find food when she was hungry. There were guests today, so the little fellow was very enthusiastic. After seeing Xiao Yuan enter the room, she went to Xiao Yuan's side and kept talking to her. Qin Ruoying asked her to sit down and wait for dinner. But at this time, the little fellow jumped down from the chair like a wisp of smoke. Then, she eagerly ran to get a bowl of rice for Xiao Yuan. After handing the bowl to Xiao Yuan, the little fellow laughed and said, "Sister, eat. Papa's cooking is delicious." She usually lived a life of stretching out her hands and opening her mouth, but today she took the initiative to take care of the guests. Her performance was really good. Therefore, Qin Ruoying rubbed the little fellow's head and praised her generously. Nian is so obedient and sensible. After hearing her mother's praise, the little fellow was obviously a little embarrassed. She sat in the chair and fidgeted a few times. Then, as if to hide her shyness, she suddenly clapped her hands and shouted, "I'm hungry. I want to eat." Okay. You eat first." Qin Shi brought the last dish. As soon as he entered the door, he heard the little fellow's muttering, so he rubbed her head and put the plate in front of her. This was the little fellow's favorite golden lion head. Each of them was as big as a steamed bun. When placed on the plate, they constantly emitted a fragrance. She did not hesitate. After picking up the spoon and forking a piece, she directly opened her mouth and took a bite. The mellow meat and juice poured into her mouth, and the little fellow was so happy that she kept nodding her head. "Papa, delicious, delicious." After swallowing the food in her mouth, the little fellow patted Xiao Yuan and said excitedly, "Sister, try it. My papa made the lion head." It's delicious. Seeing that Xiao Yuan was still a little reserved, Qin Ruoying said to her with a smile, his cooking is really good. Do you want to try it? Hearing this, Xiao Yuan picked up the chopsticks and said embarrassedly, okay. She picked up a piece of lion head and took a small bite. She did not eat as much as the little fellow. But after eating, Xiao Yuan's eyes lit up and she said in surprise, it's delicious. Boss, your cooking is so good. If you open a restaurant with this skill, I guess you'll have to wait for at least 3 hours outside. Eat more if it's delicious. Don't be shy. Well, thank you, boss. The boss's family were all good people. After a short time together, Xiao Yuan completely relaxed. After dinner, she took the initiative to play with the Barbie doll with the little fellow. She was originally a student of Beijing Normal University. If nothing unexpected happened, she should become a glorious teacher after graduation. Looking at the lively and cute little fellow in front of her, Xiao Yuan suddenly had an idea in her mind. Maybe she could consider being the tutor of the little fellow? Chapter 193. Night fell. The street lamps outside the alley constantly emitted a gentle light, as if bringing some warmth to this cold snowy night. Perhaps it was because of the cold weather, the streets were very quiet at 1:00 in the morning. It was so quiet that it didn't seem like Shangjing City. A Toyota Alpha slowly drove down from the North Second Ring Road overpass and headed straight for Dishengmen Inner Street. After the car passed Disheng Bridge, it stopped in front of Dongming Alley. Then, a man in a suit got out of the car. If Chen Shi were here now, he would recognize that this man was the Japanese who handed him a business card in the afternoon. The man in the suit got out of the car first and then stood respectfully to the side. Then, another person got out of the car. This was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s. He was not tall, only about 1.7 meters. His appearance was very ordinary, but the way he dressed was very strange. On such a cold day, this middle-aged man was only wearing a kimono and a pair of wooden clogs. This attire was very much in line with the customs of the island nation. Standing on the streets of the old Shangjing, it was particularly eye-catching. Fortunately, it was late at night and there were no pedestrians on the road. Otherwise, with the way he was dressed, this middle-aged man would definitely be photographed and surrounded. If he was unlucky enough to meet a few angry youths, he might even receive a large pile of leather shoes, eggs, banana peels, abe ashy. Bye li. Ho. Okay. Ho. The man in the suit bowed and said a few words to the man in the kimono. After a few simple words, the man in the kimono nodded and walked into Dongming Alley. The man in the suit hummed a few times. When he looked up, he realized that the man in the kimono had already walked into the alley, so he hurriedly followed him. Perhaps it was because the man in the kimono held a high position in his heart, so the man in the suit deliberately bowed when he walked. He looked like a little eunuch who served the emperor in ancient times. He always had a respectful look on his face. Dongming Alley was not very deep. After walking for a while, the two of them arrived at the entrance of the courtyard. The man in the kimono didn't need the man in the suit to remind him. He glanced at the bright gate next to him and stopped at the entrance of the courtyard. Abe? The man in the suit was a little confused. Just as he was about to say something, the man in the kimono suddenly raised his right hand and signaled for him to be silent. Chu. Ho. The man in the suit replied softly, hi. Then, he obediently retreated to the side. The man in the kimono stopped in front of the door. The kimono man closed his eyes and silently sensed for a moment. His expression turned cold, and he could not help but take a step forward. At the same time, a low meow of a cat suddenly sounded above the kimono man's head. Meow. The man in the kimono looked up and realized that a black cat had appeared on the roof. The black cat stood at the edge of the roof, its eyes glowing green as it stared at the man in the kimono in the alley. For a black cat to appear in the middle of the night, a normal person would be scared out of their wits. However, the man in the kimono was not surprised at all. Instead, he looked at the black cat with interest and said, "Hello?" It wasn't that the big cat couldn't understand human language, but there were many different kinds of human language. It really couldn't understand a single word of this kind of gibberish, therefore, the big cat couldn't understand what the man in front of it was talking about. She warned it not to change back to its original form and not to attack people easily. Therefore, when the big cat sensed a faint chi fluctuation on the man's body, it only issued a warning. Then, it laid on the roof and put on a defensive posture. The courtyard was its territory. As long as the man didn't step in, the big cat naturally wouldn't care about him. The big cat issued a warning, but the man in the kimono didn't seem to understand. Instead, he smiled and waved at the big cat. Then, he stepped on the steps outside the gate. Meow. Seeing this, the big cat suddenly felt as if someone had stepped on its tail. All the hair on its body stood on end, and its figure suddenly jumped down. Its speed was extremely fast. It jumped down from the sky and almost instantly pounced in front of the man in the kimono. The claws of felines could be retracted. When they weren't hunting, they would retract their claws into their fleshy palms. This was because it effectively prevented the claws from being worn out and at the same time, prevented them from hurting their own kind. The big cat looked fierce, but in fact, it didn't extend its claws. This was because it was only trying to intimidate the other party and scare him away. However, although it was intelligent, compared to humans, it was still a little too simple. When he saw the big cat jump down from the roof and pounce on him, the man in the kimono didn't panic at all. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face. The big cat just wanted to scare him away, but the man in the kimono directly attacked. While the big cat was still in midair, the man in the kimono suddenly raised his right arm. From bottom to top, he directly hit the big cat's belly with his palm. Bam! This palm had been brewing for a long time. When it hit the big cat's body, it even made a muffled sound. Immediately after, the big cat's thin and small body was directly sent flying. After flying a few meters, the big cat fell heavily to the ground. Fortunately, it was a monster. Its skin was rough and its flesh was thick. In addition, it had cultivated the great wilderness physical training technique that she had given it. Therefore, after taking a hit, the big cat was actually fine. It shook its body and stood up again. Meow. Even a human would be enraged after being hit by such a palm for no reason, let alone a wild beast like him. After being attacked, the big cat didn't hesitate at all. After getting up from the ground, its body rapidly expanded, and in an instant, it changed back to its original form. The big cat's body didn't become bigger to scare people, but to increase its combat power. Monsters could only rely on themselves. Therefore, in theory, the bigger their body, the stronger their combat power. Seeing the black cat in front of him turn into a black panther whose body was comparable to a fierce tiger's, the man in the kimono wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he smiled and said, "Yori yori." Just as he was putting on the airs of an expert, the big cat had already turned into a black shadow and pounced towards him again. This time, the big cat really treated him as prey. Although the man in the kimono had succeeded in his attack, when he saw the big cat pouncing on him again, he didn't let his guard down. Instead, he suddenly put his palms together in front of his chest and instantly formed several hand seals. Yori yori yori. Yori yori yori, if translated in Wuxia, it would be. Chapter 194. In the alley. Because it was too far from the roadside, the street lights couldn't reach it, so it could only be vaguely seen by the moonlight. Big Cat's figure was hidden in the darkness, its two glowing green eyes were like the wisps, floating around. It was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it was already in front of the man in the kimono. Just as Big Cat jumped up and waved its claws at the man in the kimono, he suddenly put his hands together and quickly chanted, "Ashi ashi me." At this moment, the big cat's animal instincts made it feel a sense of danger. It was a cold feeling. Although the temperature tonight was around -5 or 6 degrees Celsius, the sudden cold feeling faintly revealed a bone-chilling coldness. Big Cat's body stiffened, and then it subconsciously pulled back its fur. At the same time, Big Cat also jumped in front of the man in the kimono. But just as it waved its claws and was about to crush the man's head, a blade reflecting the cold moonlight suddenly appeared in Big Cat's sight. It was a katana. From top to bottom, it was directly aimed at Big Cat's head. Meow. Big Cat, whose voice had always been low and hoarse, let out a sharp and ear-piercing cry at this moment. At this critical moment, it suddenly stretched its claws to the top of its head, and used its sharp claws to block the katana that was coming down fiercely. Ding! The sharp claws blocked the katana, and in an instant, there was a sound of metal colliding with stone. The katana cut the Big Cat's claws, but it didn't stop, and continued to cut downwards. The blade violently rubbed against the sharp claws, and in an instant, a series of sparks were drawn. In an instant, the alley was like a firework, and the splashing sparks also reflected the face of the katana's owner. It was a samurai wearing Japanese-style armor and a Yakuza mask. The armored samurai was at least 2 meters tall, and the man in the kimono standing behind him looked like a child. Big Cat was confused by the sudden appearance of this armored warrior. After blocking the attack, it leaped back and crouched on the ground, ready to pounce at any time. The sudden appearance of this armored warrior made the Big Cat feel threatened. It didn't pounce on the warrior right away. Instead, it meowed at the warrior. The Big Cat was originally a monster in the Awakening Wisdom realm. After following Xianxia for a period of time, it ate the energy pills every day as snacks, so its cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. Now, it had even stepped into the late stage of the Awakening Wisdom realm. According to the current progress, it was estimated that it would be ready to condense a Yao core soon. Even so, the sudden appearance of the armored warrior still made the Big Cat feel threatened. Because the other party could injure it. He didn't know what material the katana was made of, but it was extremely hard and sharp. The Big Cat blocked the attack with its paw, but a shallow scratch was left on its paw. This made the Big Cat secretly vigilant. Monsters weren't immortal cultivators, so they didn't know so many fancy spells and moves. Fangs and claws were their only means of attack, but this didn't mean that monsters couldn't beat immortal cultivators of the same realm. In fact, in the case of the same realm, when monsters fought against immortal cultivators, it was usually the monsters who won by crushing them. Although they didn't have many means, every one of them was fatal. It could be said that they were simple, crude, and aimed at the vital points. Monsters didn't have as many tricks as humans. Nature's survival of the fittest had long taught them one truth: a lion would use all its strength even when hunting a rabbit. The Big Cat lay on the ground and observed for a while. Seeing that the armored warrior was still standing in place with the katana in his hand and hadn't made any movements, it leaped out again. But this time, it didn't rush straight over. Instead, it jumped to the side of the wall. Immediately after, the Big Cat was like a dragonfly skimming the water. It went along the wall, past the armored warrior, and went directly behind the man in the kimono. The Big Cat wasn't stupid. This armored warrior didn't look easy to deal with, so it was prepared to kill the man in the kimono first, then slowly deal with the armored warrior. It had been preparing for this attack for a long time. After the sudden explosion, the Big Cat's speed was even faster than before. The armored warrior was still standing in front of the man in the kimono in a daze, but the Big Cat had already pounced on the man from behind. Like a fierce tiger coming down the mountain, the Big Cat's strong body instantly pounced in front of the man in the kimono. A trace of surprise flashed in the man's eyes, as if he didn't expect this monster to know to attack him directly. However, even though he was surprised, the kimono man did not panic at all. As soon as the 9 words mantra came out, the eyes of the armored warrior, who had been standing there in a daze, suddenly flashed red. Then, he seemed to have come back to life. The armored samurai was very strange. It was as if he could teleport. He appeared in front of the kimono man and blocked the Big Cat's attack. The katana came down on the Big Cat's head again, but this time, the Big Cat was prepared. Meow. It let out a sharp roar. Then, the big cat did not care about the katana in the armored samurai's hand at all and pounced directly on the armored samurai. The katana slashed on the big cat's body, but it was as if it had hit an iron plate. In an instant, there was a loud sound of metal colliding. Ding! Under the violent impact, the big cat's body could not help but tremble. However, it still did not stop. Instead, it pounced directly on the armored samurai. This was a common hunting method for big cats. They pounced on their prey at an extremely fast speed. After knocking the other party down, they used their mouths to attack the prey's trachea or cervical vertebra to achieve the effect of a one-hit kill. However, an unexpected scene occurred. How powerful was the big cat's full pounce? However, this 2-meter-tall armored samurai resisted it. He stood in place like Mount Tai, majestic and unmoving. Seeing that it did not pounce on the other party, the big cat put its claws on the armored samurai's shoulders, then opened its mouth and bit directly at the other party's neck. Sharp teeth and claws. For monsters, teeth were sharper weapons than claws. Their sharp teeth, coupled with their huge bite force, were enough to tear all creatures into mud. The big cat bit down, followed by a series of tearing, as if it wanted to break the armored samurai's neck. However, how could the armored samurai just sit there and wait for death? Therefore, he held the katana in his right hand, clenched his left hand into a fist, and punched directly at the big cat's head. Bang! Bang! The fist hit the big cat's head, making a muffled sound. However, the big cat gritted its teeth and did not let go. Finally, with a soft tearing sound, the armored samurai's head was torn off by the big cat. Seeing that its attack had succeeded, the big cat jumped off the armored samurai's body with the head in its mouth. However, the strange thing was, the armored samurai's head was gone, but he still stood straight in place. The big cat loosened its teeth and threw the head on the ground. His head rolled a few times on the ground before coming to a stop. However, at this moment, the big cat realized, this was not a head, it was just an empty helmet. Chapter 195. Meow. The big cat looked at the helmet on the ground with some surprise. Although it had high intelligence, it lacked knowledge and experience, so it could not understand the strange situation in front of it. How could an empty set of armor possess the power to match its own? The helmet that fell to the ground rolled a few times, which attracted the big cat's attention. While it was distracted, the headless armor began to move again. The katana was raised high and then slashed down at the big cat. The cold moonlight shone on the katana, making the blade seem even sharper than before. The big cat quickly dodged to the side, but the armored samurai followed closely. After the first slash missed, the armored samurai continued to slash a second time. One slash after another, without the slightest pause, as if he never knew fatigue. This armor was obviously a dead object, similar to a puppet doll. The big cat did not have the habit of fighting with this kind of dead object. Therefore, it could only keep dodging. However, the armored samurai followed him like a shadow. He held his katana and kept chasing after him without stopping for a single breath. The big cat retreated more than 10 meters, but the armored samurai was still chasing after it. Meow. The big cat let out a rather angry growl. However, it was not an idiot who only knew how to fight recklessly. Even cheetahs would choose to use sneak attacks when hunting, using the most direct and effective method, let alone it. After discovering that the armored samurai was just a puppet, the big cat naturally did not want to be entangled with it anymore. Therefore, when the big cat retreated more than 10 meters, it suddenly jumped to the side of the roof, then stepped on the roof and rushed directly toward the man in the kimono. Its strong point was not its strength, but its agility. Every slash of the armored samurai was powerful, but if one looked carefully, his movements were extremely slow. So after the big cat took him away from the man in the kimono, it suddenly jumped to the roof, ready to get rid of the armored samurai and directly attack the enemy. However, Big Cat's every action was within the man's expectations. Seeing the black cat pouncing towards him again, the man in the kimono couldn't help but sneer. Wild beasts were still wild beasts after all. Apart from being reckless, there was nothing else they could do. The purpose of the test had been achieved, and the kimono man was no longer interested in playing with the big cat. Thus, he took out a yellow rectangular piece of paper. There were many strange patterns and lines drawn in ink on the paper. They looked very similar to the charms in the temples. The big cat jumped down from the roof and pounced on him. The man in the kimono held the note in his left hand while his right hand quickly made a few gestures. Then, he looked at the big cat in midair and coldly shouted, "Ratty, ratty, ratty. Spirit of speech, bind." As soon as he finished speaking, the piece of paper that was still intact a moment ago instantly turned into countless fine white ashes and disappeared from his hand as if it had been burned by fire. Meow. Suddenly, the big cat let out a slightly panicked scream. Because it found that its body had strangely stopped in midair. As if someone had pressed the pause button, the scene instantly froze. The big cat maintained its pouncing posture and stopped in midair, unable to move at all. This was the method of a yin-yang master. In addition to summoning spirit-branded retainers, they also knew yin-yang techniques. This was the foundation of yin-yang masters in the world. Spirit of speech, bind was one of the spells commonly used by yin-yang masters. This spell was somewhat similar to the one Xianxia used to play with his sister-in-law. However, the man in the kimono used a proper yin-yang technique, while Xianxia used force to break through the technique, directly using his true essence as a tentacle. Spirit of speech, bind had a long and short duration, and it would constantly change according to the cultivation of the caster and the target. After all, the big cat was an intelligent monster, so it was bound for less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds seemed very short, but in fact, it was enough for a lot of things to happen. For example, the armored samurai was already rushing over with his katana. Just as the big cat broke free from its bindings and continued to pounce on the man in the kimono, the katana glinted coldly and directly cut the big cat in the middle. Cut in half. If it was a normal wild beast, it would naturally be cut in half by this attack. However, the big cat was a monster. When it was in battle mode, its fur would stiffen and harden, turning into something comparable to armor to protect itself. Thus, when the katana cut the big cat, it immediately created a series of sparks on its fur. The katana's blade was extremely sharp and this cut was a solid one, so the big cat immediately cried out in pain. Meow. It was injured. After being hit by this attack, the big cat's body suddenly felt as if it had been hit by a heavy hammer, and it fell heavily to the ground with a dull thud. The big cat fell to the ground, but it didn't hesitate at all. It got up and ran, jumping back to the roof in an instant. It really suffered a big loss this time. After seeing the big cat jump back to the roof, the man in the kimono had a surprised expression on his face. He originally thought that this monster would be seriously injured even if it didn't die, but he didn't expect that this attack would only hurt its fur. The monster in front of him didn't have much attack power, but its defense was really beyond his imagination. After a short confrontation, the alley temporarily returned to peace. The big cat lay on the roof, and its glowing green eyes stared at the man in the kimono below. After the man in the kimono sized up the big cat on the roof, the expression on his face became a little serious. He didn't see the owner of this place come out after such a fierce fight, so he guessed that the other party wanted to test his strength through this monster. He didn't come here to play with this beast. If he couldn't even take care of a pet guarding the door, then he might as well go home now. Thinking of this, the man in the kimono couldn't help but look down at the katana in the armored warrior's hand. When he saw the bloodstains on it, the man in the kimono nodded in satisfaction. Then, he took out 3 talismans from his arms. Don't let others look down on you. The big cat had already suffered a loss from the talismans, so when it saw the man in the kimono take out 3 yellow talismans, it immediately let out a low growl. Meow. The big cat grimaced. An injured beast was the most terrifying. This man in the kimono had completely angered it. However, when the big cat let out a low growl, it suddenly sensed something and quickly turned its head to look to the side. A figure appeared beside it at some point. The big cat was stunned, but the person directly rubbed its head with his hand. The big cat, who came back to its senses, didn't attack him. Instead, it seemed to be enjoying it, and couldn't help but slightly squint its eyes. You did well today, this is your reward. The person lightly patted the big cat's head, and then stuffed a few pills into its mouth. The big cat swallowed the pills, and then rubbed its body against the person's leg. The ink leopard, whose body was comparable to a fierce tiger, was nestled under the person's leg at this moment, and constantly let out a pet cat's meowing sound. It looked really strange, in the alley. The man in the kimono looked up at the scene in front of him, and couldn't help but frown. He really didn't understand. Chapter 196. In the quiet alley, under the dark night sky. The young man who suddenly appeared on the roof immediately attracted all the attention of the man in the kimono. When did he get here? Where did he come from? How did he appear on the roof in the blink of an eye? The man in the kimono looked very calm on the surface, but there were waves in his heart. At this time, the man in the suit also saw the young man who suddenly appeared on the roof, so he immediately took a few steps forward and came to the side of the man in the kimono. Then, he said in an extremely low voice, "Mr. Abe, he is Mr. Chen. Mr. Abe, he is Mr. Chen, ah. I had already guessed it. Yo. Yes, after the two of them had a simple conversation, the man in the kimono signaled the man in the suit to leave. Then, he took a step forward and said to the young man on the roof in a deep voice, "Yinyang Liao's Vice Minister, Yinyang Quanzhu, Shintaro Abe, here, greets your excellency." After saying that, the man in the kimono patted his chest heavily with his right hand, and then made a chest-patting salute to Qin Shi on the roof. The man in the kimono's Mandarin was not standard, and it was somewhat like the Japanese accent that was commonly seen in TV dramas. Because of the long-term influence of the Bushido spirit, Japanese practitioners often regarded honor as more important than life, so they could not accept any mistakes, and once they made a mistake, it was very likely that they would choose to commit suicide by committing suicide. This kind of slightly morbid national culture also made them particularly worship the strong. As long as the other party was stronger than them, they would be able to obtain supreme respect. But if the other party was weaker than them, then sorry, Yinyang Liao was an official organization, mainly composed of 4 officers, technical officers, and instructors, and had various diplomatic departments and direct subordinates under them. If Yinyang Liao was compared to a county, then Vice Minister Yinyang Quanzhu could be considered as the vice mayor of this county. A county usually has 1 mayor, 5 to 10 vice mayors, or more. Yinyang Quanzhu was considered one of the top figures in Yinyang Liao. Since such a figure appeared in Huaxia's capital, he would naturally be monitored by the Wu Lian. This was a matter of great importance, so Shintaro Abe decided to pay them a personal visit. However, because the Wu Lian inspection office was following him closely, Shintaro Abe could only choose such a bad time to visit. Qin Shi stood on the roof and gently stroked Big Cat's head. At the same time, he used his true essence to stop the wound on Big Cat's back. After hearing Shintaro Abe's words, Qin Shi did not immediately reply. Instead, he silently looked at the 2 Japanese below. The man in the suit had given him a business card before, but this was the first time the man in the kimono had seen it. The deputy minister of the Yinyang Liao was the deputy minister of the Yinyang Liao. It sounded like a very awkward position. In addition, Qin Shi did not understand the Japanese culture, so he could not understand the other party's meaning for a while. However, this did not hinder Qin Shi from deducing. Onmyoji were similar to necromancers. The man in the kimono named Shintaro Abe was probably at the level of foundation building, which meant that he was at the level of Onmyoji. He was at the level of Onmyoji, which was the same level as Onmyoji. When a necromancer reached the awakening level, he could be called a heavenly master. Therefore, Shintaro Abe's position in Yinyang Liao was obviously much higher than his sister-in-law's position in Wu Lian. After such a deduction, Qin Shi had a rough idea of the other party's background. He was not very interested in Shintaro Abe. What Qin Shi was really interested in was the headless armor that was emitting yin qi. That was probably a shikigami. The so-called shikigami was called summoning demon in the West. In Southeast Asia, it was called subduing the head and enslaving the ghost. In Wuxia, it was called imperial spirit exorcism. In fact, they were all spells of the same type. It was just that the onmyoji of Japan had a deeper understanding of shikigami, so the shikigami they summoned was usually more powerful than themselves. The injuries on the big cat's body were obviously caused by the shikigami. Xianxia went to Mount Lingshan to cultivate every night, so he was not at home just now. He only hurried back when he noticed that someone had come to cause trouble. Xianxia did not say anything, so Shintaro Abe kept his hand on his chest. It had to be said that he really gave Xianxia enough face. However, the first thing Xianxia said made Shintaro Abe's expression change. There is an old saying in Wuxia, you have to look at the owner before you hit the dog. You came to my house in the middle of the night and hurt my pet, how are you going to pay for this? After hearing Xianxia's accusation, Shintaro Abe suddenly realized that he had misunderstood. That monster was not used to test his strength at all, therefore, he could only hurriedly bow and apologize. Your pet suddenly attacked me, causing me to mistakenly think that you wanted to test my strength, so I retaliated. Swords have no eyes, I accidentally hurt your pet, I hope that you will forgive me, sir. Hearing this, Xianxia could not help but look down at the big cat. The big cat was not as cunning as humans. Therefore, after thinking for a while, it rubbed against Xianxia and admitted that it was the one who launched the attack first. Although it just wanted to scare the other party away, it was indeed because it pounced that it caused the other party to counterattack. Therefore, when Shintaro Abe found such a reason, the big cat could only nod and admit it. Seeing this, Xianxia was unmoved. He did not immediately reply, but silently looked at Shintaro Abe, as if thinking about something. After a long while, Xianxia suddenly raised his right hand, formed a sword with his fingers, and pointed directly at the armored warrior beside him. A ray of golden inner yuan suddenly exploded from his fingertips. Like a laser beam, it instantly hit the armored warrior's chest. The unforeseen event happened so suddenly that Shintaro Abe could not react at all. When he turned to look at the armored warrior, his chest suddenly heated up, and a bloody taste surged up his throat. Then, he spat out a large mouthful of blood. Everlasting evil, vanquish evil. One of the 49 styles of heaven's divination, specialized in destroying all filth and evil in the world, souls and spirits. Wherever the inner yuan touched, evil spirits would be destroyed. Therefore, when the armored warrior was hit by vanquish evil, he instantly turned into white smoke and disappeared from the alley. The so-called spirit-branded retainer was actually refined with Yin spirits, and it required the caster's own blood essence to cultivate the spirit-branded retainer, and had absolute control over the spirit-branded retainer. The existence of the spirit-branded retainer was closely related to the yin-yang master, and if the spirit-branded retainer was severely injured, the yin-yang master would also be injured. Xianxia's current cultivation was not the same as when he was in Zhonghai, and a casual finger was enough to defeat the spirit-branded retainer that Shintaro Abe had painstakingly cultivated for many years. I will spare your life today, but don't let me see you again, and anything related to Yin-Yang Liao. Do you understand? Although Xianxia was no longer the 8th grader who would only hate Japan for no reason, he still did not have a good impression of Japan. He was too lazy to feign civility with Shintaro Abe in front of him, and directly expressed his attitude. Although Shintaro Abe was severely injured, his expression did not change much. After hearing Xianxia's words, Shintaro Abe acted as if nothing had happened, and hurriedly bowed and said, "Ho! I will remember. Those who belong to Yin-Yang Liao will never disturb you again. Please accept our friendship. Alright, cut the crap, you guys can leave." Ho! After saying that, Xianxia was too lazy to bother with them, and turned around to return to the courtyard with the big cat. After Xianxia left, Shintaro Abe could not stand still. His legs went soft, and he almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, the man in the suit next to him caught him in time. Xianxia suddenly turned hostile and injured Shintaro Abe, which made the man in the suit very angry. As he helped Shintaro Abe out of the alley, he whispered a few words into Shintaro Abe's ear. But what the man in the suit didn't expect was that after Shintaro Abe heard this, he slapped him in the face and scolded him. "Ah! Baka! Idiot! I'm sorry, I'm wrong." What kind of existence was a celestial being? Shintaro Abe thought that the man in the suit was actually thinking of revenge. This kind of thinking was really stupid. Because his motto was, there were no eternal enemies or eternal friends in this world. There were only eternal interests. Although the visit ended in failure, Shintaro Abe didn't think it was too bad. After all, the great era was coming. An individual's strength would always be powerless in the face of a huge organization. Chapter 197. HTTP status 500-160 /type exception report / message 160 / description. The server encountered an internal error that prevented from fulfilling this request. /exception 8 YYYYY 2 note the full stack Apache. Chapter 198. Because of the opening of the skating rink, the businesses near Hohai also welcomed the peak season, so Qianxi was really picking up money recently. Originally, when the business was good, he should have closed the shop to take care of the children. But Xiao Yuan's timely appearance saved Qianxi a lot of trouble. Xiao Yuan was not a delicate rich girl, and her hands and feet were very agile. She did the work of the tea house alone. In fact, although the business of the tea house was good, there was not much work. Therefore, after work, Xiao Yuan even had time to sit behind the bar to review her homework, which could be regarded as thoroughly carrying forward her spirit of being a top student. Since Qianxi did not need to guard the shop at all times, and the skating rink was opened again, the three little guys were naturally happy. They now went to the skating rink every day, and Qianxi naturally became the king of the children. They often went abroad, and their skating skills were good. A 4-year-old child was at the age when people liked them. In addition, they did not cause trouble to annoy people, so after a period of time, most of the staff of the skating rink knew these three cute little guys. Nian Nian, Wen Wen, Ming Ming. Once Qianxi took them to the skating rink, there would immediately be people greeting them warmly. The bustle of Hohai was always intermittent, and in the blink of an eye, it was already February. February 8th, after the beginning of spring, Little New Year. With the start of the first wave of homecoming craze, the peak period of the Shikahai skating rink was finally over. The resident population of Shangjing was as many as 20 million, but the foreign population accounted for 8 million. In addition, the household registration in Shangjing did not mean that the hometown was in Shangjing. Therefore, once the homecoming craze started, when people left Shangjing with a year's harvest, the bustle of Shangjing became desolate at a speed visible to the naked eye. Gu Lao's hometown was in Jizhou, so he also took the two brothers away. This time, they would have to come back after the Lantern Festival. When the little guy heard the news, she was stunned. After all, she had only been in this world for a short time. This was also the first time in her short life experience that she experienced the feeling of being separated from her friends. That feeling was very strange, different from when Aunt Zhang left, but it also made her very uncomfortable, unaccustomed, and unhappy. The little fellow didn't roll on the ground or cry. She just pursed her lips and waved goodbye to the brothers in a daze. "Goodbye, little sister. We'll come and play with you after the new year." "Goodbye." Gu Lao led the two brothers away. Qianxi held the little fellow's hand and stood outside the tea house, silently watching them disappear into the distant corner of the street. Feeling that the little fellow's hand was a little cold, Qianxi used his true essence to warm it up. The sudden warmth startled the little fellow. Thus, she looked up at Qianxi and murmured, "Papa," outside a small tea house in Hohai. The father and daughter stood hand in hand. The little fellow looked up while Qianxi lowered his head. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. Qianxi rubbed her head, then squatted beside the little girl. Seeing this, the little fellow took 2 steps forward, took the initiative to lean into his arms, and then wrapped her arms around Qianxi's neck. Qianxi picked up the little fellow, scratched her nose, and asked with a smile, "Not happy?" The little fellow pouted and nodded. Her pink little face was like the spring that was about to come at the end of winter, like a flower bud that was about to bloom. Coupled with that pitiful look of grievance, it really melted Qianxi's heart. Killing by acting cute. And it was his own daughters acting cute. Not to mention that he was only in the semi-god realm, even an immortal emperor would not be able to resist this, Mua. Qianxi kissed the little fellow's face heavily. But the little fellow waved her little hands, trying to push Qianxi away. At the same time, she did not forget to pout and shout, "Papa, you're so annoying." Seeing her look of disdain, Qianxi couldn't help but laugh. The little princess was angry, so he had to coax her. Looking at the little fellow in his arms, Qianxi was really dazzled by her cute appearance. What meant that the toughness that had been tempered 100 times turned into softness. After pinching her little face again, Qianxi smiled slightly, then looked at the little fellow and asked seriously, "Nian Nian, don't be angry. Daddy will show you a magic trick, okay?" Hearing what he said, the little fellow's big eyes rolled for a moment, and she pouted as if she was thinking. After a long time, she said very proudly, "Okay. Okay, nay nay." Qianxi made the sound of a horse galloping, and the little fellow immediately giggled. Seeing that the little fellow finally smiled, Qianxi held her tightly in his arms, then shouted, "Let's go, the princess is going." As soon as his voice fell, he held the little fellow and soared into the sky, straight into the clouds. In ancient times, King Yu of Zhou played with the warlords with the beacon fire, Wu Sangui was angry for a beauty, Emperor Xuanzong of Tang rode in the red dust, and the concubines laughed. Today, there was Qianxi, blue sky moon to the clouds. This was not the first time that Qianxi had shown inhuman means in front of the little fellow. But if the previous ones were acceptable, then this time, it was really a bit exaggerated. He held the little fellow and soared into the sky, and in an instant, he had flown into the clouds. The little fellow's eyes were dazzled, and before she came back to her senses, she found that she was already in a thick fog. Because there was no sound and no sense of weightlessness, she did not know what was going on at all. What was the white cloud like? In fact, it was just a cloud of mist. When people were in the clouds, it was actually like being in the thick fog in the winter morning. The little fellow lay on Qianxi's shoulder, looking around. But the thick fog covered her eyes, so she could not see anything at all. Qianxi deliberately paused in the clouds, gently pinched the little fellow's little face, and then said with a smile, "Baby, watch carefully. Daddy is going to show you a magic trick." "Okay." The little fellow did not care about being angry at this time, because the sudden change in the surrounding environment had completely attracted her attention. Human beings always had a natural fear of the unknown. But if this was Daddy's magic trick, then the little fellow would not be afraid, but would only feel curious. Seeing the little fellow nodding, Qianxi smiled, and then rushed out of the clouds with her. In an instant, the bright sun shone on the little fellow, and she closed her eyes tightly. It was still a dark winter in Shangjing, but in the blink of an eye, it was like coming to a tropical beach that was like spring all year round. The sun was blooming with thousands of golden clusters, like a kind grandfather, smiling at the little fellow. Huff, the little fellow squinted her eyes for a long time to adapt. When she opened her eyes, what came into her eyes was a vast sea of clouds. The blue sky. The dazzling sun. As well as the boundless white clouds beneath Qianxi's feet. The little fellow was stunned. After coming back to her senses, she quickly poked her head out to look at Qianxi's feet. Just like when she visited Kunming Lake at night, the little fellow only saw that Qianxi was like an immortal walking in the clouds, stepping on the white clouds and leisurely walking toward the distance with her. The clouds paved the road, and people walked in the sky. Chapter 199. In Qianxi's Lolita training plan, he did not want the little fellow to come into contact with the inhuman power too early. Therefore, when he took the little fellow to the clouds to take a look at the scenery, Xianxia quickly took the little fellow back to the ground. The little fellow had not started to read Journey to the West, so she had no concept of riding the clouds. In addition, when Xianxia was flying, he deliberately blocked her sight. Therefore, in the little fellow's cognition, she just felt that her father took her to a very strange place all of a sudden. But as for where it was, her father did not say, so she did not know. In the blink of an eye, they were in the sky, and in the blink of an eye, they were on the ground. For a 4-year-old little fellow, this was really an interesting trick. When the father and daughter returned to the tea house, the little fellow was still sitting in Xianxia's arms excitedly. She kept twisting her small body and shouted excitedly, "Papa! Do it again! Do it again!" Hearing this, Xianxia smiled and pinched her little face. Then he said mysteriously, "There is not enough time today. We have to go home for dinner. Daddy will show you more interesting magic tricks in the future, okay?" The little fellow tilted her head and thought for a while. Perhaps she was interested in the more novel tricks he said, so after thinking for a while, she grinned and said, "Okay. Good girl." The father and daughter talked as they returned to the bar. Xiao Yuan did not know what they had just done. When she saw Xianxia coming over with the little fellow, she immediately got up and said, "Boss, this is today's account. Do you want to see it?" While speaking, Xiao Yuan handed over the bill. Qin Ruoying used to calculate the account when she had nothing to do, but Xianxia was completely a hands-off boss. Therefore, after opening the business for several months, she had not seen him calculate the account even once. The little girl was smart, diligent, and attentive. Even though Xianxia didn't arrange any work for her, Xiao Yuan still did the accounts for this period of time clearly. Every day's income was clear at a glance. Xianxia took the account book from Xiao Yuan's hand. After glancing at it casually, he put the account book back on the bar. Xiao Yuan got up and gave him the position of the shopkeeper. Xianxia did not refuse. He sat on the chair with the little fellow in his arms. He opened the drawer under the bar and saw the profit of the tea house this month. The red 100 yuan bills were placed in a pile, and the 50s and 20s were placed in order. After a rough count, there were tens of thousands of them. Xianxia casually fiddled with the money in the drawer. Then he took out a stack from the inside and put it directly into Xiao Yuan's hand. "You've been working here for more than a month. It's been hard on you. This is your bonus and salary. Take it." Looking at the stack of $100 bills that Xianxia handed over, Xiao Yuan froze on the spot. Even if there were not 10,000 in this stack, there were at least 8,000. When she came, she did not think about asking for a penny. Now that Xianxia gave her so much money, Xiao Yuan naturally could not accept it. "No. I can't take this money. Working in the tea house is so boring. I didn't do much, and I owe you a big favor. I can't take a penny from you." As she spoke, Xiao Yuan ran out of the bar counter like a wisp of smoke. Looking at her, she was probably afraid that Xianxia would insist on giving her the money. Seeing this, Xianxia could only purposely keep a straight face and said to Xiao Yuan with a serious face, "That's another matter. It's already the spring festival. If you don't accept this money, then I'll be angry." "No, I can't take your money. Dad is well. Our family is not short of money, and I don't want money," Xiao Yuan said very hesitantly. She did not want to take a penny, but Xianxia's attitude was so firm that it put her in a difficult position. Xianxia wanted to give it, but Xiao Yuan did not accept it. At this time, it was natural for the little fellow to come forward. So, Xianxia put the money in the little fellow's hand and put her on the ground. Without waiting for Xianxia to say anything, the little girl held the money and ran to Xiao Yuan's side, then raised her hands high and smiled sweetly, "Sister, your money." This move was fatal to both men and women. As soon as Xiao Yuan saw the little fellow's sweet smile, she subconsciously took the stack of money from her hand. Seeing that she had accepted it, the little girl ran back to Xianxia's side with her short legs and laughed, "Papa. Sister will accept it. You are still the best." Xianxia smiled and pinched the little fellow's little face. After picking her up from the ground, he said to Qiao Yuan with a smile, "Let's go. It's time to close." Ah. Qiao Yuan stood there with the money in her hand. After hearing Chen Shi's words, she asked in surprise, "Closed so early? It's not even 3 o'clock yet. Let's go. It's the new year. Do you still want to work overtime?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly understood something. She nodded quickly, packed up, and left the tea house with Chen Shi. Since the tea house was closed, Qiao Yuan naturally should go home. After she packed her luggage, Chen Shi sent her out of Dongming Alley. There were fewer pedestrians on the street. That kind of desolation that suddenly filled the air should be the so-called New Year's smell. Qiao Yuan thanked Chen Shi again and again. After getting in the car, she stretched out her hand and waved goodbye to the father and daughter. Watching the taxi gradually go away, the little fellow suddenly thought of the brothers. So, she sat in Chen Shi's arms and murmured thoughtfully, "Papa, is it the new year again?" After hearing her faint murmur, Chen Shi could not help but frown. The little fellow was different from other children. She did not like the new year. Because every new year, she only had Aunt Zhang by her side. After the old and the young had dinner as usual, Aunt Zhang would sit on the sofa with her in her arms and quietly watch the New Year's gala. She did not receive New Year's money, nor did she set off fireworks. She had no siblings, no friends, and no companions. Even her parents were not by her side. Even though the little fellow was still young at that time, she could feel the faint coldness. It was different from loneliness. It was a feeling that only appeared during the new year. How could a child who grew up in such a situation like the new year? As the little fellow's mood fell to the bottom, Chen Shi's frown deepened. He thought for a moment, hugged the little fellow a little tighter, kissed her little face, and asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, this year, Mom and Dad are all here. Grandpa is also here, and Auntie is also here. The new year is in a few days. Dad will cook you a lively reunion dinner and take you to set off firecrackers, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow suddenly thought of something. Yes. This year was different from the past. So, she hugged Chen Shi's neck and nodded heavily, with a smile on her face again. "I want New Year's money. Other children have New Year's money. I want it too. Then let Grandpa and Auntie give you red packets, okay?" "Okay. Papa is the best." The little girl was so happy that she planted a kiss on Chen Shi's face, making him laugh out loud. Chapter 200. February 15th, New Year's Eve. The little girl was woken up by the sound of firecrackers. Perhaps due to the cultural heritage of Shangjing City, there was no ban on setting off firecrackers in Shangjing City. Of course, there was a time limit to this. Within Shangjing's 5th Ring Road, firecrackers could only be set off on New Year's Eve and New Year's Eve. From the second day onwards, firecrackers could only be set off during the day. It would continue until the 15th day of the first month before it was completely banned. After all, the Chinese New Year was the most important festival in the Chinese nation. It had been passed down for more than 4,000 years. If firecrackers couldn't be set off on New Year's Eve, it would feel really weird. As firecrackers were not banned, Hohai would be very lively during the Chinese New Year. A few years ago, everyone's environmental awareness was still very weak. Once it was the Chinese New Year, they wouldn't hesitate to set off firecrackers. It was also because of this that 1 or 2 pubs in Hohai would catch fire almost every year. Over the years, as the smog problem in Shangjing became more and more serious, the citizens slowly learned to restrain themselves without the need for the government's orders. They just set off a few firecrackers on New Year's Eve for fun. Today's breakfast was still porridge, but it wasn't ordinary porridge. It was Chen Shi's meticulously made laba porridge. After a bowl of laba porridge, the little girl was full. The firecrackers outside were so loud that it made the little girl's heart itch. After eating breakfast, she wanted to go out to take a look, but she was stopped by Chen Shi. Nian, it's the Chinese New Year. As a junior, you should give your elders New Year's greetings. Come, let's give Grandma a New Year's greeting over the phone. In a few days, we'll go to Chengdu and let Grandma give you a red packet, okay? Upon hearing Chen Shi's words, the little girl's eyes lit up. She jumped up and down and shouted, okay. I want to give Grandma a New Year's greeting. Grandma wants to give me a red packet. Chen Shi sent a video call request to Auntie Zhang, and the old lady quickly picked up. Before Chen Shi could speak, the little girl saw Auntie Zhang's face appear on the screen. She excitedly snatched the phone from Chen Shi's hands and shouted sweetly, Grandma. Grandma. I want to give you a New Year's greeting. New Year's greeting. Nian is so sensible. Grandma is so happy. When Auntie Zhang saw her little face, she was so happy that she couldn't stop laughing. The little girl was particularly excited today. After greeting Aunt Zhang, she ran out of the west wing with the phone in her hand. Then, she raised the phone and looked around. She finally felt what it meant to celebrate the new year. She acted coquettishly with Auntie Zhang for a while until Auntie Zhang had something to do. She then reluctantly said goodbye to Auntie Zhang. Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying were hanging red lanterns in the courtyard. As soon as the red lanterns were hung up, the courtyard immediately felt a bit more festive. When Chen Shi was about to paste the word Fu on the door and window, the little fellow finally couldn't hold back and shouted that she also wanted to paste it. Thus, Chen Shi brought her a small stool and let her step on it. He pasted a big Fu character on the window. Qin Yongyan didn't cultivate today. Early in the morning, he came to the main hall. Then, he placed an incense burner on the large red sandalwood carving table and lit 3 incense sticks. When the little fellow saw Qin Yongyan, she immediately ran to Qin Yongyan according to what Chen Shi had taught her. Then, she excitedly shouted, Grandpa! Grandpa! I wish you a happy new year and all the best. Good luck. Give me the red packet. After saying that, she looked at Qin Yongyan eagerly and didn't forget to reach out her little hand at the same time. Qin Yongyan was also stunned by her sudden trick. After being stunned for a while, he suddenly laughed and said, Okay. Grandpa will give you a red packet. Qin Yongyan patted the little fellow's little head. Then, he took out a brand new 100 yuan note from his pocket and directly stuffed it into her hand. The little fellow held the brand new 100 yuan note and smiled happily. In fact, she didn't have any concept of money. Usually, she only needed to call Papa if she wanted something. The reason why she was so happy now was because of the meaning attached to this 100 yuan note. This was the first time she received New Year's money. New Year's Eve was after the beginning of spring. At this time, the temperature had obviously risen a lot. There were fewer cars during the spring festival, and there was no exhaust pollution. Shangjing City also changed the appearance of the past heavy smog, and for the first time, blue sky and white clouds reappeared. After lunch, the couple took the little fellow to the door and pasted couplets. Family photo every year. Good luck and fortune every year. Horizontal writing, good luck and fortune. Just as the family of 3 was busy pasting couplets, a voice suddenly sounded from behind them. Ying. Qin Ruoying looked back and saw a middle-aged man and woman. The woman was about 40 years old, but she was very well maintained. She could be said to have a beautiful body and still had a charm. The man looked about the same age as Qin Yongyan. Looking carefully, he looked somewhat similar to Qin Yongyan. Second uncle. Second aunt. You're back. Qin Ruoying handed the couplets in her hand to Chen Shi. Then, she quickly walked in front of the 2 people and greeted them warmly. Second uncle Qin Yongwang and second aunt Wang Chuanju, who were her sister-in-law's parents. Second uncle, second aunt, this is my husband, Chen Shi. Qin Ruoying introduced Chen Shi to the 2 of them. Hearing this, Chen Shi took the initiative to nod to the 2 of them and said with a smile, Second uncle, second aunt, hello. Upon hearing Chen Shi's name, Wang Chuanju suddenly seemed to have thought of something, and the expression on her face couldn't help but freeze. Qin Yongwang noticed his wife's strange behavior and coughed quietly. Then, he smiled at Chen Shi and said, "Hello." It seemed that this newly risen celestial was easier to interact with than they thought. Thus, second uncle started chatting with his nephew's son-in-law very politely. The little girl stood beside Chen Shi. Seeing that the adults were talking and ignoring her, she immediately pouted unhappily. This little girl was only half of Chen Shi's height. In addition, Chen Shi was too eye-catching, so Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju didn't notice her at all. It was the new year, yet she was being ignored. Of course, the little girl was unhappy. Thus, she twisted Chen Shi's arm and shouted, "I want to set off fireworks." Her voice was as clear and pleasant as a silver bell, instantly attracting everyone's attention. "Yingying, your daughter?" Wang Chuanju's eyes lit up when she saw the little girl who looked like a porcelain doll. "Yes, she's called Chen Nian." Qin Ruoying led the little girl away from Chen Shi and said, "Nian Nian, greet great-aunt." "Great-aunt." The little guy called out sweetly, which immediately amused Wang Chuanju and made her laugh out loud. When a woman reached this age, she would want grandchildren more than a man. Qin Shueqing's birth characters hadn't been set in stone yet, so she could only count on Qin Ruoying. A niece's daughter was also a grandniece, right? With the arrival of Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju, the courtyard finally became lively. Chapter 201. The New Year's Eve dinner was also called the reunion dinner. This was the dinner on New Year's Eve, and it was also the most important meal of the year. What the little fellow had eaten before could only be considered a family dinner, and this was also her first time eating the reunion dinner. The reunion dinner couldn't be just a few simple home-cooked dishes. Because they had to prepare the main dishes, they usually had to start preparing after noon. For such an important meal, naturally, Chen Shi was in charge of cooking. In fact, Chen Shi didn't have any special hobby when it came to cooking. The reason why he cooked every meal was because the little girl liked to eat the dishes he cooked. Today, the Sai courtyard finally became lively. Chen Shi's family of 3, Qin Shueqing's family of 3, and Qin Yongyan, who was the most senior. The TV in the main hall finally came into play. Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang sat in the main hall, chatting while watching TV. Wang Chuanju wanted to go to the kitchen to help Chen Shi, but Chen Shi smiled and refused. Chen Shi was busy cooking a feast for the family, and Qin Ruoying accompanied the little fellow in the courtyard to set off fireworks. Qin Ruoying naturally couldn't buy any firecrackers for the little child. A simple string of incense was enough to make her overjoyed. The string of incense was also known as the electric flower, also known as the fairy stick. It was mainly made of aluminum powder and potassium perchlorate, which had a low ignition point. Once it was ignited, it would emit thick smoke and sparks in all directions. This thing was of good quality and cheap, and it was very safe. Unless it was burned on the face, it basically wouldn't burn clothes or hair. It was also the most popular fireworks for children during the New Year. Last year during the New Year, the little fellow was only 3 years old. Naturally, Aunt Zhang wouldn't let her touch fireworks. As for setting off firecrackers, that was even more impossible. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying lit the first firework for the little fellow immediately jumped up and down excitedly. Wasn't the firecracker that was emitting thick smoke and sparks the magic wand in little fairy's hand? The little fellow carefully took the firecracker from Qin Ruoying's hand and simply waved it. After finding that there was no danger, she ran wildly in the yard. It was not dark yet, so the effect of the fireworks was not very good. However, the little guy was having a lot of fun. He waved the fireworks and circled around the yard. Perhaps it was infected by her laughter, but today, the big cat was no longer as lazy as it usually was. The little girl ran in front with the fireworks in her hand, and it meowed behind her. Who knew what they were laughing about? The first stick of fireworks burned out very quickly. Thus, the little girl ran back to Qin Ruoying's side and eagerly waited for her mother to light a second one for her. Qin Shueqing and Wang Chuanju stood on the steps outside the east wing. When they saw the little fellow's adorable appearance, Wang Chuanju sighed with emotion. Yuqing, you were just as adorable when you were Niannian's age. Hearing that, Qin Shueqing smiled and said, people grow up eventually. Yes, people grow up eventually. When they grow up, they have to start a family and have children. I don't know when I, as a mother, can become a grandmother. Look at your uncle, I'm so envious. Wang Chuanju's sudden exclamation caught Qin Shueqing off guard. After a long silence, she stiffly spat out, I'm going to practice. After saying that, she quickly ran into the east wing as if she was escaping, leaving Wang Chuanju standing outside, covering her mouth and laughing secretly. 6 adults and 1 child, naturally a big table had to be set up, so this New Year's Eve dinner was exceptionally sumptuous. These days, everything was about good luck. Every dish was carefully selected by Chen Shi, such as the 5 blessings, 3 sons, Tuan Tuan, Yuan Yuan, Nian Nian Yu, Happy Tonight and so on. After he placed the dishes one by one on the big table in the main hall, the little girl didn't even set off the fireworks, and ran back after smelling the aroma. She knelt on the chair and stared at the table full of delicious dishes. Her saliva almost flowed out of her mouth. The little girl turned around and glanced at Qin Ruoying. She realized that she didn't follow her into the main hall, but turned to the east wing, so she quickly grabbed a piece of pork rib from the table. Who would have thought that her sneaky behavior would be caught red-handed by Wang Chuanju? Wang Chuanju liked this grandniece very much. When she saw the little girl's gluttonous and adorable look, she couldn't help but pat her little head. This sudden movement also gave the little fellow a huge fright. She was gnawing on the pork rib with both hands when she suddenly felt her head being touched. She was so frightened that her little hand trembled, almost throwing the pork rib away. Great! Great aunt! The little girl turned around with the pork rib in her mouth and saw that Wang Chuanju was standing behind her. She immediately pouted her lips and greeted her. Perhaps she had a guilty conscience, or perhaps she wanted to drag her down with her. Therefore, before Wang Chuanju could say anything, the little girl got up from the chair, grabbed a piece of pork rib and handed it to her. She said sweetly, Great aunt. Eat the pork rib. Wang Chuanju looked at the pork rib in the little girl's hand, then looked at her little greasy mouth. She immediately laughed and took the pork rib from her hand. Io, Nian is so sensible. Good girl. Wang Chuanju said as she sat next to the little girl. When the little girl saw that Wang Chuanju had eaten the pork rib she handed over, her little face suddenly bloomed with joy. By the time Chen Shi brought out the last dish, the lively New Year's Eve dinner had finally begun. At the same time, the Spring Festival Gala began. Just like drinking wine without a side dish, if one didn't watch the Spring Festival Gala during the New Year's Eve dinner, one would feel that something was missing. Although the Spring Festival Gala in recent years had fallen into a vicious cycle of being held every year and scolded every year, if there was really a year when the Spring Festival Gala was suddenly not held, the people of the country would probably riot. Perhaps the Spring Festival Gala wasn't as bad as imagined. The reason why it was scolded every year was because everyone had high expectations for it. As the saying goes, love is hate. The more they scolded, the more it meant that they cared about it. It was lively on the TV, and so was the Sihiyuan. Among the people at the table, except for the little girl, no one could be considered a real ordinary person. However, they were like ordinary people today. The family sat together happily, simply eating and chatting while watching the Spring Festival Gala. The little girl was soon full, but she didn't run around. Instead, she sat obediently in Wang Chuanju's arms and watched TV. She couldn't understand skits, nor could she hear the actors' lines clearly. She didn't even know the subtitles above, but whenever she heard the audience applauding on the television, the little girl would clap her little hands happily. The programs came one after another, and in a flash, it was 12 o'clock. Before the host counted down, some impatient people had already gone to the streets and set off fireworks and firecrackers one after another. 10, 9, 8, 7, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. As soon as the voice fell, the bell rang, and then the people of the country boiled over. The crackling of firecrackers suddenly exploded, and countless fireworks bloomed in the night sky, instantly illuminating half of the night sky. The family came to the courtyard one after another, looking up at the brilliant fireworks one after another. Not to mention how excited the little girl was. Even Qin Shueqing, who had always been cold, couldn't help but smile at this moment. Chapter 202. Flowing lights and colorful lights illuminated the city, and fireworks lit up the night sky. The rumbling sound of firecrackers was like thunder in summer, carrying the people's desire for the new year, and instantly turned the dark night sky into a sea of fireworks. Zhonghai was different from Shangjing. Fireworks and firecrackers were prohibited in the outer ring of Zhonghai, so this scene could not be seen during the new year. Although the fireworks show broadcast by CCTV was gorgeous and lively, it was not as vivid as standing under the night sky. The overwhelming firework rain continued to bloom in the night sky. The little fellow stared at her big eyes, opened her small mouth, and was so excited that she could not even say a word. It was really beautiful. Fireworks were easy to cool down, but the fleeting brilliance was enough to be remembered for a lifetime. Later, with the help of Qin Shi, the little fellow successfully ignited a sky rocket cannon. Her sky rocket cannon was particularly small compared to the large fireworks outside, but the little fellow was still very happy. The firework rain lasted for about 20 minutes before gradually subsiding. The reunion dinner was finished, and the fireworks were also released. This new year, she finally had a real one. The next day, when the little fellow slowly woke up, the air seemed to be filled with a faint smell of gunpowder. She sniffed her nose and suddenly smelled a strong fragrance. The little fellow opened her eyes and saw that Qin Shi was sitting on the bed with a bowl of longevity noodles in his hand, slurping and slurping. So, this unwashed and unkempt little sloppy directly threw herself into Qin Shi's arms, opened her small mouth, and wanted Qin Shi to feed her. "Papa, I want to eat too. You get up and wash up first, then you can eat." After that, Qin Shi got up and left with the noodles in his hand, not giving in to her at all. The little fellow's small mouth twitched, and seemed to be a little unhappy. However, the temptation of delicious food was in front of her, so after hesitating for a moment, she obediently got out of the bed, and then followed Qin Shi into the bathroom. These were longevity noodles that Qin Shi had specially made using high-gluten flour. One strand was enough to fill a large bowl. Coupled with the bone broth and meat shavings that he had meticulously cooked, along with fried eggs, shiitake mushrooms, and cabbage, just looking at it was enough to make people drool. In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to eat, Qin Shi also put the noodles in the most conspicuous position. This broth was not the soup dumplings of Wei Qian, so not only did it smell good, but it also smelled delicious when it was eaten. The longevity noodles were too delicious, so the little guy followed Qin Shi's example, making slurping sounds as he ate the noodles. In just a short while, the bowl of noodles had been eaten clean. After she finished her breakfast, Qin Shi brought the little fellow to the main hall. The first day of the new year was the day to pay New Year's greetings to the elders, so Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang were already sitting in the main hall, waiting for the little fellow's arrival. Qin Shi led the little fellow to Qin Yongyan, and then the little fellow bowed to him and said, "Grandpa, Happy New Year. I'm here to pay you New Year's greetings." "Io, good child. Come, yesterday's doesn't count. Today's is the New Year's money from Grandpa." As he spoke, Qin Yongyan smiled and handed a big red packet to the little fellow. The little fellow touched the thick red packet, and suddenly grinned foolishly. Seeing this, Qin Shi patted her head gently. Then, the little fellow seemed to come back to her senses, and hurriedly said to Qin Yongyan with a big smile, "Thank you, Grandpa. Happy New Year, Grandpa." The child was still young, so she didn't understand these traditional customs and ceremonies. Naturally, it was up to her parents to guide her. After she paid her New Year greetings to Qin Yongyan, Qin Shi led her to Qin Yongwang again. Hua Xia was particular about seniority. Qin Ruoying was the female, and Qin Yongyan was the maternal grandfather. Qin Yongwang was Qin Ruoying's second uncle, so the little fellow should call him granduncle. Wang Chuanjiu was granduncle's wife, so she should call him grandaunt or great-aunt. Granduncle didn't sound as intimate as grandpa, so Qin let the little fellow omit the word uncle in front, and just call them grandpa and grandma. Grandpa, grandma, Happy New Year. Wang Chuanjiu liked the little fellow very much. When she saw the little fellow bow to her, she immediately pulled the little fellow into her arms. Nian is so good. Come, Grandma will give you a big red packet. Thank you, Grandma. The little fellow held a big red packet in one hand, and her little face was so happy that flowers bloomed. Legend had it that in ancient times, there was a kind of little demon called a ghost. It had a black body and white hands, and every year on New Year's Eve, it would come out to harm people. People were afraid that ghosts would come to harm their children, so that night, they would light up the lanterns and sit without sleep. It was called guarding ghosts. Because of the homonym of sway and ghost, everyone thought that after the child received the New Year's money, they could ward off evil spirits and exorcise them, and spend the year peacefully. What the elders gave to the juniors was called ghost money. What the juniors gave to the elders was called lucky money. Generally, after paying their New Year greetings to the elders, they could go out and visit relatives. There were only so many people in the family, and they didn't have any relatives, so Wang Chuanjiu suggested that they take the little fellow to the temple fair to have fun together. Qin Shueqing didn't want to go, but before she could say a reason, Wang Chuanjiu glared at her fiercely. Looking at that attitude, it was impossible for her not to go today. Thus, the big family simply packed up and walked out of the courtyard together. There were 6 adults, 1 child, and 1 cat. The whole family was really mobilized. The group of people walked out of the alley. She went to the roadside and was about to call a taxi, but Wang Chuanjiu stopped him and called someone to send a car over. Then, 2 red flag H7s with white and black lettering drove over from not far away. The license plate of the armed police should have the word WJ on it, but the license plate of the 2 cars was WL. Clearly, they were Wu Lian's cars. The drivers of the 2 cars had met Qin before. They were the fake couple from the inspector's office. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. Xiao Wang parked the car at the entrance of the alley. After he got out of the car, he appeared very reserved and greeted them. Mr. Chen, Deputy Director Qin, Director Wang, Director Qin, Happy New Year. Just saying these titles made Xiao Wang feel a lot of pressure. When Qin Yongwang saw this, he smiled and patted Xiao Wang's shoulder. He said very kindly, Xiao Wang, you've worked hard. Happy New Year. Not at all, not at all. When Xiao Wang heard his leader's concern, he laughed foolishly. The inspector's office also had a rotation system. Because the new year was very special, one day could be 3 days. On the 3rd day of the new year, Xiao Wang could rest for more than 10 days. Moreover, the New Year's subsidies were very high. When he thought about it, he was naturally very happy. Xiao Wang and Xiao Lu left after sending the car over. Then, Qin family of 3 and his sister-in-law sat in one car, and the elders sat in another. The whole family went straight to Earth Temple in a grandiose manner. Temple fairs were considered a traditional folk activity in Wuxia. Every new year, many places in Shangjing would hold temple fairs. In fact, temple fairs were quite similar to market fairs. However, temple fairs would be interspersed with various performances, mainly to worship customs and celebrate festivals. Markets, on the other hand, were purely commercial activities. Hohai was less than 5 kilometers away from Earth Temple. Normally, it would take half an hour to drive to Earth Temple, but today, it only took a few minutes. After parking the car, the whole family walked into Earth Temple in a grandiose manner. Today, Earth Temple was very lively. There were rows of red lanterns hanging outside, and there was a lion dance performance at the entrance. The people on both sides of the street gathered in circles. It was really a noisy scene. There was a sea of people, and it was a lively scene. Chapter 203. Going to the temple fair during the spring festival was an old custom that the people of Shangjing had followed for many years. The Earth Temple Fair was only held for 8 days, but in these short 8 days, it received more than 1 million visitors, which was really lively. Each temple fair had its own special performances, and the Earth Temple Fair performed the Qing Dynasty Palace ritual. This ritual would strictly follow the worship process of the Qianlong Emperor, and the costumes and props were also made according to the historical records, so that the people could see how the emperor worshipped the earth. The ticket for the temple fair was only 10 yuan, so compared to going to the mall and watching a movie, it was actually a very down-to-earth entertainment. Usually, a large family of men and women of all ages came together, not to buy anything, but simply to stroll around. It was very happy to squeeze together and watch the fun. 6 adults and 1 child walked with a cat. Qin Yongyan and Qin Yongwang walked in the front, while Qin Ruoying and Qin Xueqing walked side by side. The 2 sisters hadn't talked for a long time, and now they were together whispering something. Qin Shi and Wang Chuanju were walking together, while the little fellow was lying on Wang Chuanju's shoulder, holding a windmill in her hand. Looking at the bustling scene of people jostling shoulder to shoulder, she was very happy. The family came out to stroll, so naturally, they had to chat on the road. Sure enough, after walking for a while, Wang Chuanju turned her head and looked at Qin Shi with a smile. She casually said, "You are Yingying's husband. If I call you my nephew's husband, it always feels a bit awkward. How about I call you little Qin, what do you think?" Hearing this, Qin Shi smiled and replied, "Second aunt, you are too polite. You are an elder, so you can call me whatever you want." "Well, then don't blame me for taking advantage of my seniority and putting on the airs of an elder in front of you." "Why would I?" "Second aunt, you are joking." The 2 of them chatted awkwardly for a while. At this time, the little fellow saw a barbecue skewer stall nearby, so she shouted to eat barbecue skewers. "Papa! I want to eat that. Meat! Meat!" Gluttonous baby smelled the aroma of the barbecued meat, and his saliva almost flowed out. Thus, Qin Shi went to buy a few mutton skewers for her. When Qin Shi bought the meat skewers for her and the little girl was eating them, Wang Chuanju suddenly asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Little Qin, has Ming Qing ever told you about the Wu Lian?" "Yes, I did." Qin Shi nodded. He already knew what Wang Chuanju wanted to say to him. After all, Qin Shi had heard how Xiao Wang addressed Qin Yongyan and Wang Chuanju when he was delivering the car. Secretary Qin, Director Wang. The administrative levels of Wuxia could be divided into 5 levels: national level, provincial level, departmental level, county level, and township level. The Director General was a department-level official, equivalent to an ordinary mayor of a prefecture-level city, or the head of a provincial public security department or the head of a provincial education department. From this, it could be seen that Qin Yongwang's status in Wu Lian was really not low. At least, he was at the level of Shintaro Abe. Celestial beings were really too eye-catching. Because of Qin Ruoying, Qin Shi was related to his sister-in-law's family, and their family was the backbone of the Wu Lian. Now, naturally, they wanted to pull Qin Shi into the Wu Lian. The word relationship was a very magical existence in the eyes of Westerners. Because there was no corresponding translation of this word in other languages, they specially invented an English word, guanxi. China-style relationship. A simple example could be given. Once the people of Wuxia were in trouble, the first thing they would think of was not a lawyer, but an acquaintance. Through their acquaintances and friends, they could get in touch with the government to solve the problem. The word relationship represented many meanings, and there were many usages. The word itself was a neutral word. How to use it, where to use it, and whether it was appropriate to use it. This was why it carried both positive and negative meanings. Not long ago, his sister-in-law asked Qin Shi if he was willing to join the Wu Lian. Today, Wang Chuanju did the same thing again. It was foreseeable that if Qin Shi still did not agree today, then Qin Yongwang, or even Qin Yongyan, might come forward to invite him to join the Wu Lian. If that still did not work, then Qin Ruoying would probably have to come forward and persuade him. This was probably the so-called people in Jianghu have no choice. As long as Chen Shi still had concerns in his heart, then he could not ignore some things in this world. Join the Wu Lian? It was still the same words, not considering. It was not that he disliked the Wu Lian. He simply found it troublesome. There was no free lunch in this world. The Wu Lian could not support a group of people without doing anything. Chen Shi was now used to being lazy. Except for his wife and children, he really did not want to run errands for others. Apart from not wanting to run errands for others, he also didn't have any desire to compete for the throne. So now, as long as he could stay by the hot bed every day and laugh with his wife as they watched the little one grow up day by day, he was already very satisfied. The little fellow did not know that her father was so unambitious. After eating a skewer, she suddenly thought of Chen Shi, so she handed one of the skewers to Chen Shi and grinned. "Papa, the skewers are delicious. You eat too. Good girl, good girl." Chen Shi took the skewer from the little fellow with a smile and ate it. The little fellow turned to ask Wang Chuanju if she wanted to try, but Wang Chuanju shook her head with a smile and then wiped her mouth with a tissue. Wang Chuanju did not speak, but her attention was always on Chen Shi. Chen Shi felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by her. On second thought, instead of being remembered by the Wu Lian like this, it was better to take this opportunity to make it clear to them. So Chen Shi looked at Wang Chuanju and said to her directly, "The reason why you want me to join the Wu Lian is that you want to use me to deter other forces, right?" "Well, you can think of it that way." Wang Chuanju nodded. When she was about to say something, Chen Shi did not give her a chance to speak at all. Instead, he continued, "Then you can announce to the public that I have joined the Wu Lian. Anyway, I can't jump out and expose you, right?" "How can that be? You are a celestial being. If you are willing to join the Wu Lian, you should be treated accordingly." "I don't need any special treatment, so I won't join the Wu Lian." Hearing Chen Shi's resolute answer, Wang Chuanju could not help showing a trace of disappointment in her eyes, although she had been prepared for it. What a pity. However, just as Wang Chuanju was feeling disappointed, Chen Shi said with a smile, "How about this? If the Wu Lian has any problems that can't be solved, I can be a guest, but only once. What do you think?" Hearing this, Wang Chuanju's eyes lit up. She smiled and said, "Promise?" "It's a deal." In fact, this was not a simple conversation between an aunt and a niece, but a direct conversation between a Wu Lian and a celestial being. The meaning of this promise was not simple. Chapter 204. The temple fair was crowded with people, and the sound of gongs and drums filled the sky. It was a festive scene. For the Wuxia people, the significance of the Spring Festival was extraordinary. The Spring Festival was also a holiday, but this long holiday was different from the Mid-Autumn Festival, the Dragon Boat Festival, and the National Day. Because only during this period, people could let go of their social identities, no longer bosses, employees, or students, but fathers, mothers, or children. Their social identities were temporarily invalid, and they had to rush home no matter where they were, just to be able to have a good new year with their families. The conversation between the two was quite pleasant. After reaching a consensus with a few simple words, Wang Chuanju stopped talking about business with Chen Shi and talked about the education of the little fellow. Chen Shi had already made up her mind to wait until September next year before sending the little guy to kindergarten for big classes. At that time, she was 5 years old. After adapting to kindergarten for a year, she was just at the age of primary school. The timing was just right. The little fellow was now very clever. When the adults spoke, she would listen to them. It didn't matter if she didn't understand. Once she heard something that she could understand, she would immediately express her opinion. For example, when she heard the sensitive word kindergarten, the little fellow immediately pouted and shouted, "I don't want to go to kindergarten." In the past, she was lonely and had no one to accompany her. Now, under the leadership of the two brothers, she had completely let go of herself, so she would rather die than go to kindergarten again. The little fellow sat in Wang Chuanju's arms and twisted her buttocks. Seeing this, Wang Chuanju comforted her with a smile. Okay. If you say you don't want to go, then don't go, Grandma is so nice. The family strolled around Daitan Park for the whole morning. When it was time for lunch, Qin Yongwang took everyone to know. B16 at the north gate of Daitan Park. No. B16, Hepingli Central Street, was a high-end club, similar to the Binjiang Club, but far better than the Binjiang Club. If the Binjiang Club represented business, then no. B16 represented power. It was originally a royal garden called Jifanjuan, which was under the jurisdiction of Daitan Park and covered an area of nearly 10,000 square meters. At first, the project approval was in the name of building office space in Daitan Park. However, after the construction, it suddenly changed and directly became a gathering place for the rich and powerful. No. B16 Club. This kind of fraudulent operation was simply not something that ordinary people could imagine. Therefore, even though Daitan Park received millions of visitors a year, few people knew that this imperial garden, which was only a wall away from Daitan Park, was actually the most high-end private club in Shangjing. Gate B16 was the highest-grade gate with red paint and gold nails. There was only one staff member in the park security uniform standing outside the gate. If it were an ordinary tourist, they would probably think that this place was not open to the public and that it was some kind of museum or research institute. Qin Yongwang handed over a card. After the staff took a look at it, they bowed to him respectfully and opened the door. The door was only opened halfway. After Chen Shi and his family walked through the door, the staff quickly closed the door. Where the emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties once reigned, the merchants of the present day gathered at the altar. Without going out of the city, one can enjoy the beauty of mountains and rivers. While staying in the bustling city, one can enjoy the beauty of the woods and springs. Standing behind the gate and looking around, one could see the palace rooms, corridor pavilions, pond pavilions, climbing corridors, rockery, and so on in the garden. The Qing dynasty relics in the garden, such as Jingguan Hall and Jinghe Hall, as well as the Xingshi Hall on the inner wall of the north side of Daitan Park, reflected a strong palace style. Now, these buildings had all become private rooms of the B16 Club. The family had just walked through the gate, and before they had time to look around, two young women in cheongsams came over. They first paid their respects to Qin Yongwang, who was the leader of the group. Then, they led the group of people into the garden. Along the way, the feeling was like being in the palace of the Qing dynasty. The surrounding ancient buildings had been carefully renovated. All of them were gilded and painted with color, with corner tiles and eaves. When they passed by the parking lot, Chen Shi also noticed a small detail. The license plates of all the cars here were covered with cloth covers. It could be said that this was a meticulous service. The two women in cheongsams led the family around the garden for a while. After passing through the garden and crossing the stone bridge, they walked into a private room. The private room was very large, about 100 square meters. The decoration in the hall was decorated with dragons and phoenixes as the theme. It was decorated with large colored palace lanterns, bright yellow tablecloths, napkins, and chair covers. The tableware was made of porcelain and silver that imitated the Qing dynasty. Looking at this posture, it was estimated that they wanted the guests to experience the feeling of the emperor eating. After the family sat down, Qin Yongyan first looked around, then pointed at Qin Yongwang and said jokingly, "You, corrupt official, a very corrupt official." Hearing this, Qin Yongwang hurriedly waved his hand and smiled. "Don't accuse me of being a corrupt official. This membership card was given to me by the boss here. It's rare for me to come here. You see, it's New Year. Our family should have a good meal, right? Oh, then it's thanks to you." The two of them joked a few words. In fact, these materialistic things were of no importance to the few people present. The only reason they came here to eat was because of the novelty. In this kind of place, what they ate was not the taste, but the environment and service. Not to mention the environment, this place was definitely the best in the country. As for the service level, it could be seen from the number of people. There was a woman and a cheongsam standing in each of the 4 corners of the private room, and there were 2 waiters. There were only 7 people in Xianxi's family, but there were 6 waiters here. Moreover, it was the spring festival. The dishes were served very quickly. In less than 20 minutes, the table was full of dishes. Wang Chuanju served the little fellow and tasted a few of them. She pursed her lips and carefully recalled the taste. Then she commented, "It's not as good as what Papa cooked." Nonsense, her father was in the semi-god realm. Cooking was like shooting a rocket. The amount of salt he put in had to be precise to 2 decimal places. How could the dishes not be delicious? The quality of the food here was so high, so the taste would naturally not be bad. The little fellow was really making things difficult for others. The whole family laughed happily as they ate. Qin Yongyan didn't like outsiders watching him while he was eating, so he asked the waiters to leave. However, not long after the waiters left, there was a sudden knock on the door of the private room. After Qin Yongyan asked to come in, a man who looked about 30 or 40 years old came in. The man was holding a glass of red wine. After briefly glancing at the people in the room, he went directly to Qin Yongwang and said to him with a smile, "Secretary Qin, Director Wang, I just heard that you were eating here, so I wanted to come and give you a New Year's greeting. Do you mind if I come uninvited?" After hearing the man's words, Qin Yongwang stood up and replied with a smile, "Mr. Wu, you're welcome." As he spoke, he picked up his glass and gently clinked it with Mr. Wu's. Chapter 205. Young Master Wu's full name was Wu Hui, and he ran some unknown businesses in Shangjing. He was involved in many industries, such as finance, real estate, energy, film, internet, and so on. Anything that could make money, young Master Wu definitely had a share in it. Wu Hui's business was very big, but he usually didn't run it under his own name, so there were very few people who really knew his name. For example, business moguls like Ning Zhonghua and Zhou Haixing who started from scratch. Although they were rich, that was all there was to it. In China, money was not the only thing that mattered. The Chinese language was broad and profound, and the term young master in ancient times generally referred to scholars or young men from wealthy families. In the past, this term was a form of respect and a compliment. But in modern times, the term young master seemed to have a derogatory connotation, just like the 4 young masters of the capital. Just like the term emperor, anyone could joke and say that they were the emperor, but in the past, it would be a crime punishable by death. The so-called 4 young masters of the capital, in the eyes of people like Wu Hui, were actually similar to clowns, insects that could be trampled to death with 1 foot. How could a few nouveau riches be worthy of the title of 4 young masters of the capital? Of course, disdain was disdain, but Wu Hui wouldn't bother with ordinary people for no reason. Because they didn't have contact with them, many people's understanding of the second generation of rich and powerful people might be one-sided, thinking that they were all mud that couldn't support the wall. As the saying goes, dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and mice give birth to sons that know how to dig holes. In reality, most of the second generation were very outstanding. After all, their parents were very outstanding, and the education that these second generation received from a young age was far better than ordinary people, so in terms of personal quality, cultivation, and knowledge, the outstanding second generation could be said to be dragons and phoenixes among men. As for the nouveau riches like Li Tian'er and Yao Jiesin, who caused a huge sensation in society, they could only be compared to ordinary people. If they were placed in the real circle of second generation, this kind of trash wouldn't even have the qualifications to carry shoes for others. Wu Hui had shares in B16, so the waiter told him about the arrival of Qin Yongwang's family. Qin Yongwang took a glass of juice and clinked it with Wu Hui, then introduced his family to him one by one. When it was Chen Shi's turn, before Qin Yongwang could introduce him, Wu Hui laughed and said, "This. Could you be Mr. Chen?" Hearing this, Chen Shi stood up with the juice in his hand. He nodded and said, "Hello. Hello, hello. I've heard a lot about Mr. Chen." I didn't expect Mr. Chen to be so much younger than I thought." After confirming Chen Shi's identity, Wu Hui immediately lowered his posture. When they clinked glasses, he deliberately lowered his glass to give Chen Shi enough face. However, this seemingly polite action of his attracted Qin Yongwang's attention. Although it was said that the Hua sedan chair was always carried by people, and the brothers on the Imperial Golden List were ranked first. But no matter what, Wu Hui was still a third generation of the Red Army, and his age was also a few years older than Chen Shi. Therefore, according to common sense, there was no reason for him to lower his status in front of Chen Shi. Something was strange. Wu Hui politely toasted everyone in the room. Even the little girl raised her glass of juice and clinked glasses with him. Then, Qin Yongwang invited him to take a seat. After he sat down, Qin Yongwang did not beat around the bush. He directly asked the question in his heart, "Mr. Wu, today is the first day of the new year. Why aren't you celebrating the new year with your family? Why are you here instead?" Hearing this, Wu Hui did not hide it. He smiled and said, "Director Qin, it's not a coincidence that I met your family here today. In fact, I came here after I received the news." "Oh? Why?" "For Mr. Chen." As soon as he said this, Chen Shi suddenly became the focus of the room. Even Qin Ruoying was a little confused. When did Chen Shi get in touch with Wu Hui, who represented the new generation of power in Huaxia? For me? Not only was Qin Ruoying confused, but even Chen Shi himself was confused. Therefore, he immediately asked, "Mr. Wu, this is the first time we've met. I'm a little confused by your words." "Mr. Chen, it's true that this is the first time we've met, but I've been fascinated by you for a long time." Wu Hui looked at Chen Shi meaningfully and finally said the purpose of his visit. "Actually, I came here today to ask for a favor. Not only am I representing myself, but I'm also representing my father." "Go ahead." After hearing Wu Hui's serious words, Chen Shi did not feel anything, so he casually nodded. However, the more Qin Yongwang listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. The expression on his face could not help but become more serious. At this time, the smile on Wu Hui's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Chen Shi and said solemnly, "My grandfather's physical condition is getting worse and worse. I heard that Mr. Chen has the ability to understand the world, so I took the liberty to come here today to disturb you. I only hope that Mr. Chen can save my grandfather." After that, Wu Hui got up and bowed respectfully to Chen Shi. The reason why he was so polite in front of Chen Shi was actually not because of Chen Shi's identity as a celestial being, but because the king of hell was worried. How many powerful second generations were there in Huaxia? After careful calculation, it was actually not far from the truth. There were 7 senior officials, 72 deputy national officials, at least 270 senior officials, and at least 1,700 deputy ministers. These people formed the pyramid of power in Huaxia. Only their children could be called the real second generation of power. A civilian like Li Danjiang, who enjoyed the treatment of a major general through singing, was nothing in front of these leaders with real power. Wu Hui was also one of the most outstanding people among the second generation of the Quan family. However, the reason why the Wu family was so prosperous now was not because of his father, but because of his grandfather. Although the old man had been retired for a long time, his connections were still there. As long as old man Wu did not pass away, the Wu family would be able to live in Shangjing and even Huaxia for a day longer. Wu Hui's father was called Wu Ying. He was 62 years old this year, and happened to be stuck at a very awkward time. Here, it had to be mentioned that Huaxia's chaotic retirement system had to be mentioned. When the new party congress was held, only people under the age of 67, including 67, were eligible to become members of the new Politburo. And those over the age of 67, regardless of their ability or political achievements, were all treated as retirees. If anything happened to old man Wu in these 2 years, then Wu Ying was likely to stay in his current position until he retired. Perhaps he would be promoted again, but what awaited Wu Ying would be the vice chairman of the National People's Congress or other similar positions. They were all at the deputy national level, but in reality, these positions were not as good as the senior officials with real power. Although they were promoted, they were actually demoted. Even if they were promoted, they would only retire to the second level. Not to mention Wu Ying, even Wu Hui could not accept this situation. If Wu Ying could not pass this hurdle, then the Wu family's current glory would disappear with the old man's passing. Chapter 206. Yama's Sorrow, Yama's Sorrow. If Yama wanted someone to die at midnight, he could keep them alive until dawn. Legend had it that a single pill of Yama's Sorrow could bring the dead back to life. It had the miraculous effect of reviving the dead. Although Wu Hui also felt that this was an exaggeration, he was now like a drowning man desperately trying to grasp at the last straw. Therefore, he roughly explained the Wu family's current predicament at the dinner table. There was nothing shameful about this. As long as Xianxia could let Elder Wu live for 2 more years and hold on until Wu Ying successfully crossed the threshold, then the Wu family would be able to maintain their current status. Once Xianxia agreed, then this favor would really be a life-saving grace for the Wu family. Wu Hui was very smart, so he didn't mention anything about remuneration from beginning to end. Instead, he kept pleading very sincerely, "Mr. Chen, please save my grandfather." The Wu family will always remember this great kindness in their hearts. It was the new year, and the family could still encounter this kind of thing. Xianxia pondered for a moment, then frowned and asked, "How old is your grandfather today?" 84. He doesn't have any serious illness, right? Only old illnesses like high blood pressure and gout. It's probably because he injured his roots on the battlefield. The old man's old, and his body can't take it anymore. Recently, his mental state has been getting worse and worse, and he doesn't even have the energy to get out of bed, so, Wu Hui didn't finish his words. However, the meaning behind his words was very simple. Although the old man wasn't seriously ill, he was nearing the end of his life. Death was an illness that couldn't be cured. After all, a person's life was limited. When a person faced a natural death, they would always be aware of it beforehand. Therefore, many old people would call their children home before they died, and let their children wash and change their clothes for them. After taking one last look at their children and grandchildren, they would close their eyes and pass away peacefully and naturally as if they were asleep. They had never suffered the torture of illness before, and they would pass away peacefully in their sleep. Therefore, to the people of Wuxia, dying of old age was a blessing, a great blessing. After all, Elder Wu was an old man who had walked through the war years. He had experienced ups and downs and enjoyed the prosperity of the world. Now that he was nearing the end of his life, it should have been a joyous occasion. Unfortunately, this was not the right time. If the old man passed away at such a critical moment, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the Wu family. It was a nightmare. Just a little more, once the old man passed away, how could Wu Ying advance further? What Wuxia did not lack the least was talent. There were plenty of competitors who had the same qualifications and abilities as Wu Ying, and some were even older than him. As the saying goes, the tea cools down when the person is gone. These things were top secret. The fact that Wu Hui was willing to reveal the old master's condition in front of everyone meant that he saw Xianxia as his last hope. Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju glanced at each other before they started to eat. This was a very important matter, so the moment Wu Hui finished speaking, Qin Yongwang glanced at Wang Chuanju and started to eat silently. Qin Yongyan was dressed in white. Qin Ruoying didn't understand the situation, and Qin Shueqing was completely uninterested. Everyone was waiting for Qianxi's answer. The only one who could laugh at such a time was obviously the little girl. She picked up her chopsticks, clumsily picked up a piece of fatty meat, and handed it to Qianxi. Then, she said seriously, "Papa, I'll treat you to it." The little girl didn't eat fatty meat because she felt that it was too stuffy, so she hated fatty meat very much. She didn't eat it, but she could give it to Papa. The little brat had learned how to be naughty. Qianxi turned to look at her, reached out and rubbed her head. Then, he opened his mouth and swallowed the fatty meat on her chopsticks. After seeing Xianxia swallow the fatty meat, the little girl clapped her hands and giggled, "Papa is so awesome." Her clear childish voice sounded in the private room, which was particularly ear-piercing. Xianxia glanced at Wu Hui thoughtfully, but saw that there was no change on his face, which made Xianxia think more highly of him. Therefore, he didn't beat around the bush. After motioning the little girl to be quiet, Xianxia turned to look at Wu Hui and asked very calmly, "Mr. Wu, I don't know if you have heard of the saying, life and death are predestined, and can't be changed." Hearing this, Wu Hui's face changed greatly. In a moment of excitement, he even accidentally knocked over the wine glass on the table. Life and death are predestined, and can't be changed. This sentence was said by Zhuge Liang when Wei Yan stepped on his life lamp. How could Wu Hui not know? Zhuge Liang went out of Mount Qi 6 times and exhausted his efforts. Finally, he set up the 7-star life-extending lamp in Wuzhang Plain in an attempt to change his fate. However, because Wei Yan accidentally knocked over his life lamp, all his efforts were wasted, and he died with regret. The reason why Sima Yi had the last laugh was not because he was stronger than Zhuge Liang, but because he had lived for a long time. He dragged Zhuge Liang to death and exhausted 3 generations of the Wei Kingdom's monarchs. All the enemies who could compete with him were dead. Naturally, the Sima family could achieve great things. In terms of survival ability, Sima Yi was the best in the world. Old Master Wu was not Sima Yi, but Zhuge Liang, so Wu Hui stood in place and couldn't help but clench his fists. In the end, he was still a little unwilling, so he asked in a slightly trembling voice, "Mr. Chen, you really don't have a way?" 1 year, Grandpa only needs 1 year. Xianxia shook his head slightly, then took out 3 energy pills from his bag and put them on the round table. After slowly turning the energy pills in front of Wu Hui, Xianxia said calmly, "This is the legendary Yamas Cho. In fact, you should know that the Jianghu's rumors can't be trusted. After all, this medicine is not the life fruit of the grand deity Jin Yuan. It can cure diseases, but it can't change fate. You can take it back and let the old man try it. It should improve his mental state, but I still say the same thing, life and death are predestined, and can't be changed. Young Master Wu, I'm very sorry." Wu Hui stared at the 3 pills in front of him in a daze. This was the Yamas Cho he had been dreaming of, but Xianxia's words completely extinguished the hope in his heart. After spitting out a mouthful of turbid air, Wu Hui used a tissue to carefully wrap up the 3 pills. Then, he solemnly bowed to Xianxia and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chen." After that, he turned and left the room without even saying goodbye to Qin Yongwang. Perhaps it was because they empathized with Wu Hui's feelings, so the atmosphere in the room became a little strange. After Wu Hui left, Qin Ruoying looked at Xianxia thoughtfully, then asked in a low voice, "You really don't have a way?" Hearing that, Xianxia smiled and shook his head, not answering her question. Zhuge Liang wasn't the only one who knew how to use the 7-star life-prolonging lamp. Zhuge Liang failed, but another person succeeded. That person was Lu Bowen. Zhuge Liang divided the world, Lu Bowen unified the country. Lu Bowen was the #1 strategist of the Great Ming Dynasty. He followed Zhu Yuanzhang to wipe out the warlords and expel the Tatars. After many years of fighting, he realized that his life was coming to an end, so he used the 7-star life-prolonging lamp to extend his life by 12 years. Only then was he able to help Zhu Yuanzhang unify the world and recover the Han people's country. To put it bluntly, it wasn't that Xianxia didn't have a way, but that he didn't want to. There were too many implications, and it couldn't be explained in a few words. The title of Yamas Cho was made by Ning Zhonghua, so today, it was up to him to personally destroy this title. The previous chapter has been censored, and I don't know when it will be released. Let's leave it at that. Friends who haven't read it can wait a few days, when the editor goes to work. I won't write about these sensitive topics in the future. Chapter 207. Huaxia was too big, and there were too many people. What happened to Wu Hui's family was not uncommon in the officialdom. The Great Han Empire and the Great Tang Empire, which used to be extremely powerful, would also collapse one day. Compared to them, what was the Wu family? Life and death were fated and could not be changed. As the supreme ruler of the world, the emperors of each dynasty held the power of life and death in their hands. They sat on 3,000 beauties, ate all kinds of delicacies, and wore all kinds of silk. But in the end, they all pursued the same thing, immortality. If Qianxi promised Wu Hui today to extend old Master Wu's life and help the Wu family out of this predicament, then, the threshold of the courtyard would probably be trampled flat by people who came to ask for medicine. Wu Hui's sudden departure seemed to have diluted the festive atmosphere. It was supposed to be a happy time for family reunion, but now everyone was silent. Qin Yongyan first looked at Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju, then turned to look at Qianxi. Only then did he pick up the juice and smiled at the little girl. Nian, Grandpa taught you a poem. Do you want to learn it? Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and asked, Poem? Grandpa, what is a poem? It's the same as a poem. Have you recited a poem? Yes. Papa taught me to recite poems before. When it came to poems, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Perhaps she wanted to show off, so before Qin Yongyan said anything, she took the initiative to recite it. Goose, 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 curving its neck to the sky. White feathers floating on the green water, red palms plucking the clear waves. This was what Qianxi taught her in Kangju district. He did not expect her to remember and recite it so fluently. Her performance won her applause from the audience. The family laughed and praised the little girl for being smart, which made her feel a little embarrassed. Seeing his daughter so smart, Qianxi also felt proud, so he could not help but reach out and pinch her little face, which made the little girl pout on the spot. Papa, you're so annoying. Even the little one knows how to be shy. With her interruption, the atmosphere in the private room became much livelier. At this time, Qin Yongyan chuckled and said, Nian, lyrics are like poems. Do you want to learn? The little guy's performance in reciting the poem had won the cheers of the entire hall. This made her extremely proud, so she immediately nodded and replied, yes. All right, then listen carefully. Qin Yongyan stood up and his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had come to the riverside and was looking at the torrential river. He passionately chanted, My name is Qin Yongyan. The rolling Yangtze River flows eastward, and the waves wash away all heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure are gone in the blink of an eye. The green hills are still there, and the sunset is still red. White-haired fisherman and woodcutter on the riverside, accustomed to the autumn moon and spring breeze. A pot of turbid wine was a happy reunion. So many things from the past to the present are just jokes. So many things from the past to the present were all jokes. After hearing this, Qin Yongwang couldn't help but tilt his head and look at Wang Chuanju. He instantly understood what Qin Yongyan wanted to express. He didn't really want to teach the little guy to recite the poem. He just wanted to use this as an excuse to express his opinion on this matter. Compared to Qin Yongyan and Qianxi's leisurely and complacent appearance, the couple's performance was indeed a bit too utilitarian. They were both martial artists, but because they had been in the Wu Lian government for a long time, they naturally couldn't avoid being contaminated with some official habits. However, this point was extremely detrimental to their martial arts cultivation. Qin Yongyan was giving them pointers, everyone was smart, so there was no need to say anything. Just a little pointers would be enough. This song, Riverside Immortal, was the theme song of the 1994 version of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The little guy still hadn't watched The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so this song was a bit too difficult for her to pronounce. Thus, after she rolled around for a long time, she found that she couldn't even remember the first line. Immediately, she pouted unhappily and shrank back into the chair. I can't recite it. I'm not going to recite it. Qianxi was afraid that she would be deeply affected, so he quickly smiled and comforted her. Nian, be good. It's not your fault that you can't recite it. Don't be discouraged. This song is really too difficult. When you go to school in the future, you will naturally recite it. Hearing this, the little guy still looked unhappy. She turned her head and didn't talk to Qin Shi. Her cute little appearance immediately made everyone laugh. Having a little one at home was like having a treasure. The little guy was now the happy fruit of the family. Her every frown and smile could affect the mood of the whole family. After lunch, the family left B16 and then drove to the bird's nest, ready to take the little guy there to ski. The bird's nest was happy during the ice and snow season. In fact, it was similar to the Shikahai ice rink, except that one was a frozen lake that turned into an ice rink, and the other was a snowy gymnasium that turned into a ski rink. There were only a few entertainment projects. The bird's nest had it, and the Shikahai also had it, but the little guy still had a lot of fun. She was now enjoying the supreme treatment. The whole family revolved around her. If she wanted something, she only needed to open her mouth. Naturally, her father or grandmother would run errands for her. This little guy was really spoiled to the sky. This spring festival was quite fulfilling. Chapter 208. Go to Chengdu to see Grandma. This suggestion was very tempting for the little girl. The little girl had a good impression of Chengdu. Although she didn't like Kai Shu Qin, her grandma was there. Therefore, after hearing Qin Shi's suggestion, the little girl immediately jumped up and shouted excitedly, "I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma. I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma." The family of 3 was standing outside the courtyard to send Qin Yongwang and his wife off. The little girl's sudden shout even startled Qin Yongwang and his wife, who had already walked to the entrance of the alley. While they were sending their grandparents off, she was already shouting about looking for Grandma. This was the reason why Qin Shi didn't often mention Aunt Zhang. The little girl always listened to the wind and rain. Once she had an idea, she couldn't take it back. After sending Qin Yongwang and his wife off, Qin Shi and his family returned to the West Wing and began to pack their luggage. During this time, Qin Shi even asked his sister-in-law if she wanted to go to Chengdu with them, but his sister-in-law decisively refused. The family's general mobilization during the Spring Festival had already delayed a lot of time. Now that they were finally free, she naturally had to work overtime to cultivate and rush back. Therefore, after the family of 3 simply packed, Qin Shi booked the plane tickets online. Shangjing to Chengdu. In 2 days, it would be the peak period to return to the city. Shangjing to Chengdu would only cost a few hundred yuan, but Chengdu to Shangjing would cost 3,000 to 4,000 yuan. It might even be impossible to buy a ticket. This was the right time to go to Chengdu. After booking the plane tickets, Qin Shi suddenly thought of something. He quickly opened WeChat and sent a video call request to Aunt Zhang. He didn't know how the old lady spent the Spring Festival. If the family of 3 rushed over excitedly and found that Aunt Zhang wasn't in Chengdu, then it would be a wasted trip. As expected, Qin Shi sent 2 video calls, but no one answered. Therefore, he had to call Aunt Zhang. Beep, beep, the phone rang for a long time. When Qin Shi was about to give up, the phone finally connected. "Hello, is this Brother Qin?" It was not Auntie Zhang's voice, but Xia Pinglin's. He was slightly older than Qin Shi, but after the previous incident, Xia Pinglin had indeed learned a lot, so he treated Qin Shi as an elder brother. Xia Pinglin called him Brother Qin out of respect from the bottom of his heart. "Yes, it's me. Where's Auntie Zhang? Why didn't she answer the phone?" "Ah, my mother is sick and hospitalized." Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but frown. What a joke. Auntie Zhang had already taken his elixir before she left Zhonghai, and the elixir she gave Ning Zhongguo wasn't even the simplified version. It wasn't that Qin Shi wanted to boast, but this pill could make Auntie Zhang immune to all kinds of diseases. It wouldn't be a problem for her to live a long life. Now, Xia Pinglin was telling him that Aunt Zhang was hospitalized. Therefore, Qin Shi's first reaction was to say, "Yukiting. Are you king kidding me? What's going on? My mother suddenly fainted the day before yesterday. We sent her to the hospital, and the doctor said that it was very likely that she fainted due to insufficient blood supply to the brain. She needs to be hospitalized for a while to be sure. Is it serious? It shouldn't be a big problem. After she woke up, she just felt very tired, so she had to sleep for a long time every day. Which hospital are you in? Huaxi, okay, I'll call you when I arrive. Keep the phone connected. Huh? You're coming to Chengdu? Xia Pinglin was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly said, my mother should be fine. Brother Chen, you don't have to make a special trip. Xia Pinglin wanted to say a few polite words to Qin Shi and tell him not to worry, but Qin Shi hung up the phone. Then, Qin Shi briefly told Qin Ruoying about Auntie Zhang's situation. Qin Ruoying didn't know the seriousness of the matter, but when she heard that Auntie Zhang was hospitalized, she was still very nervous, so she quickly carried the little girl and followed Qin Shi to the airport in a taxi. It only took 3 hours from Shangjing to Chengdu. When they got off the plane, it was not even 5:00 in the afternoon. The family of 3 took a taxi and went straight to Huaxi Hospital. Many shops along the way were not open, and there were only a few scattered cars on the viaduct. Right now, Chengdu looked like an empty city. However, in fact, according to the comprehensive calculation of the National Tourism Administration's data center, the number of tourists received by Sichuan and Chongqing during the Spring Festival this year was the second highest in the country, second only to Yuezhou. As long as it was a holiday, tourist attractions would be full. Places like Chuanxi Road, Jinli, Wuhou Temple, and Wenshu Courtyard were so crowded that the roads were closed. Although there was a place in Chengdu that was not a tourist attraction, it was more lively than a tourist attraction. Moreover, 365 days a year, it was lively every day as if it was the new year. This was Huaxi Hospital. After getting out of the taxi and seeing the dense crowd in front of him, Qin Shi let the little girl ride on his shoulder while he held Qin Ruoying's hand and squeezed into the hospital. With so many patients, the beds were naturally very tight. When Qin Shi found Aunt Zhang's bed according to the address given by Xia Pinglin, he was so angry that he frowned. Aunt Zhang's bed was in the aisle. When he left, he had left a total of 1.8 million yuan in cash for Xia Pinglin. In the end, this was how Xia Pinglin treated Aunt Zhang. Chapter 209. Although the smell of disinfectant was strong in the corridor of the hospital, there seemed to be an irrepressible stench in the air. The corridor was bustling with activity. Although there were many people, everyone was trying their best not to make too much noise. After all, it was an unlucky place. Sadness and sadness were the main theme here. The back of the bed could be raised. Instead of saying that Aunt Zhang was lying on the bed, it was better to say that she was leaning on the bed. When the little girl saw her grandmother's sickly appearance, she immediately lay in her grandmother's arms and cried out sadly. When Aunt Zhang saw this, she immediately patted her little head and comforted her very kindly. Oh, my good granddaughter, what's wrong? Who bullied you? Tell Grandma, Grandma will stand up for you. Hearing this, the little girl's eyes turned red. She said with an aggrieved face, Grandma, don't be sick. I don't want you to be sick. All right, Grandma is not sick. Aunt Zhang took out a tissue and wiped the little girl's face. Then, she pinched her little face and comforted her. Good girl, don't cry. Look at how many people are here, and you're still crying here. Don't you feel embarrassed? The little girl turned her head and glanced at both sides of the corridor. When she saw that many people were looking at them, she immediately sniffled a little embarrassedly. Then, she threw herself into Aunt Zhang's arms and hugged her tightly. Just when the little girl and Aunt Zhang were being lovey-dovey, Qin Shi came to Xia Pinglin's side. He patted Xia Pinglin's shoulder and walked to the side. When Xia Pinglin came over, Qin Shi asked directly, what did the doctor say? They did a Doppler examination in the morning. The report is just out. I've asked the doctor. The doctor said that acute cerebral blood supply is very common in the elderly. It's not a big problem. She just needs to pay more attention to her diet and rest. Is that so? Qin Shi pondered for a while. Then, he looked at Aunt Zhang's bed and asked rather unhappily, "Are there no more beds in the hospital? Why did they arrange for her to be in the corridor?" There were several types of beds in the hospital. The most common ones were a 7-person room, a 3-person room, a double room, and a single room. As for the aisles, usually only patients with limited beds or financial difficulties would stay there. In the past 2 years, the housing prices in Chengdu had risen particularly fast. The prices in the Third Ring Road had exceeded 10,000, and the prices in the South Gate were as high as 20 to 30,000. However, Qin Shi had not given Xia Pinglin 1 million, but 1,800,000. The money was more than enough to buy a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room. Moreover, Xia Pinglin and his wife had some savings. But this time, when she saw Qin Shi and his family enter the door, Kai Shuqin's attitude changed drastically. Before Aunt Zhang could call her, Kai Shuqin stood up and warmly invited Qin Shi and his family to take a seat. Then, she excitedly ran to make 2 cups of tea for Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying. After making tea, Kai Shuqin didn't forget to peel an apple for the little girl. However, Kai Shuqin was very enthusiastic, but the little guy still remembered the grudge. After being ignored by Kai Shuqin last time, the little guy especially disliked this strange aunt. Therefore, when the little guy saw Kai Shuqin about to hand the peeled apple to her, she suddenly turned her head, snorted twice, and climbed from Qin Ruoying's lap to Qin Shi's lap. Qin Ruoying was a little confused. After thanking Kai Shuqin very politely, she took the apple and prepared to feed the little guy. But at this time, the little guy was lying in Qin Shi's arms. No matter how she called, the little guy was unwilling to raise his head. Kai Shuqin could not find a way out of this situation due to his outburst of anger. After smiling at Qin Shi a little awkwardly, Kai Shuqin let Aunt Zhang take care of the child, and she quickly walked to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Qin Shi used 1.8 million to solve the conflict in Aunt Zhang's family, and also made Kai Shuqin completely change. After all, the little guy was not a stingy person. She also saw the changes in Kai Shuqin. As a result, during dinner, the little fellow finally stopped giving her attitude and sat obediently on the chair to gorge himself on the food. At the end of the spring festival, the family happily ate the homemade hot pot. That taste, it was simply unimaginable. After dinner, the family prepared to go out for a walk. Aunt Zhang's house was diagonally opposite the Wuho temple, so when they walked to the street, they saw the street was full of red lanterns, and the street was full of tourists. The family came to the entrance of Jinli to take a look. After seeing that there were many tourists inside, they dismissed the idea. Therefore, Qin Ruoying suggested that they go to the movies. And her suggestion was immediately seconded by the little guy. The little guy had never seen a movie before. And it was not only her, even Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before. Of course, it was not that Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before, but she saw an old theater in the past. The screen was much bigger than the current IMAX, and could accommodate thousands of people at a time. Aunt Zhang's impression of the cinema was still in the 1980s, so she did not really want to go. Seeing this, the little guy was immediately unhappy. He stomped his feet and insisted that his grandmother go with him. Aunt Zhang could not persuade him, so she had no choice but to agree. Therefore, Kai Shuqin went home to take care of the child, while Aunt Zhang and Xia Pinglin accompanied Qin Shi's family to the movies. Chapter 213. Auntie Zhang's house did not have a TV on demand, nor did it have so many strange toys, so the little fellow lost interest after sitting for a while. She began to wander around. The little fellow wanted to go out and play, but when she stood at the threshold and looked at the large field outside the house, she curled her lips and stopped. She didn't dare to go. In Trump's words, it was her first time here, and she hadn't even warmed up the territory yet. Of course, she didn't dare to go anywhere. The little fellow put one hand on the door and the other hand flipped the corner of her clothes. That pitiful little look was somewhat like a resentful wife waiting for her husband to return from work. Qin Ruoying was helping Kai Shuqin clean up the kitchen. When she came out and saw the little fellow's back, she immediately went to Qin Shi and gently touched him. Qin Shi certainly understood what she meant, so after a slight smile, he suddenly stepped forward and hugged the little fellow from behind. The little fellow exclaimed. When she turned around and saw that it was her father, she couldn't help but pout. Before she could speak, Qin Shi asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, Mom and Grandma are tidying up the house. Dad will take you out to play, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow turned her head and glanced at the surrounding environment, then muttered in a low voice, "It's not fun here. Why is it not fun?" "It's just that you're still young and haven't seen those fun things. Let's go, Dad will take you to see it." After that, Qin Shi carried the little fellow and walked directly to the bamboo forest. It was noon now, and the sun was very bright, but once they entered the bamboo forest, there was still a chill in the air. This bamboo forest was quite old, and the branches and leaves were very lush, so much so that it blocked a lot of the sun, looking a little gloomy. Cold and wet places had always been unfavored by mammals, so the little fellow's first reaction was to want to leave. Qin Shi sensed her fear, so he patted her back, and then released a strand of Jinyuan. Under the true essence, the little fellow immediately had a warm and comfortable feeling, which also gradually calmed her slightly trembling little body. The bamboo forest was not very big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. After Qin Shi brought her into the bamboo forest, he placed the little fellow on the ground. Because very few people would come here, the fallen bamboo leaves had piled up layer after layer. Stepping on them would immediately make a rustling sound. Since the beginning of the new year, the sun had been shining continuously for several days. Therefore, when the little fellow stepped on the ground, the pile of withered leaves began to creak. This made her feel a little interested, so she stepped on it and started jumping around. "It's so scary, crazy. Why? I heard them say that last year, her son suddenly fell into the river and drowned. Guifan couldn't figure it out and drove herself crazy, last year?" "Yes, I heard it was last summer." After hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Qin Shi frowned and didn't say anything for a long time. The old woman in the wedding gown's real name was Zhao Guifan. Qin Shi had close contact with her before, so he knew that she wasn't simply crazy. She clearly looked like she had lost her young soul. The young soul was different from the Yin soul. Losing the Yin soul would only cause the body to be weak and sickly, but if the young soul was lost, it would cause the Yin energy to control the yang. It would cause the human heart to be dark and weak, and the 4 major diseases would come to an end. The dark heart mentioned above referred to people becoming stupid and foolish, just like what Zhao Guifan had just shown. Losing the yang soul meant that one wouldn't live long. Zhao Guifan was only a few years younger than Aunt Zhang. If she was born without a soul, and it was the extremely important yang soul, then she obviously wouldn't have been able to live to such an old age. Without a doubt, Zhao Guifan's sudden madness was definitely not because of her son's death, but because she had lost her yang soul. A perfectly fine person wouldn't lose her yang soul for no reason. Then, he thought of Aunt Zhang's sudden and inexplicable faint a few days ago. Qin Shi's expression immediately darkened. This place was really a little strange. The absent-minded curse wasn't as gentle as the meditation curse. This also caused the little fellow to sleep for a long time. When she woke up, she would have to go tomorrow. The countryside wasn't like the city. There were no street lights or billboards here. As soon as the sun set, the entire village would be completely swallowed by the curtain of night. Why did the supernatural phenomenon in the countryside continue? Wasn't it because there were too few entertainment activities in the past? At night, everyone would either wash up and go to sleep, or close the door to make little people to play. It was indeed much better than before. Every household had a TV, and everyone had a 4G phone, so after dark, everyone could watch TV and play with their phones before going to sleep. Perhaps it was because they had returned to the countryside. Aunt Zhang's family rested very early. However, at 9:30 p.m., they all washed up and went to sleep. After the lights in the room were turned off, the outside of the house was suddenly pitch black, and one couldn't even see their fingers. It wasn't spring yet, when everything was recovering. Without the chirping of birds and insects, it was particularly quiet outside the house. Lying on the bed, if one closed their eyes and listened carefully, they could even vaguely hear the sound of flowing water below the valley. Chapter 2:15. People who had never been to the countryside might not be able to understand that feeling. That kind of darkness was just like what Qian Zhongshu described in the siege. The night was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. In this kind of night, even ghosts would have to touch their noses and turn around. A cat would hate itself for not being able to use its mustache as an insect's feeler. In the late winter night, the mountain wind whistled. The withered grass and bare branches made a strange creaking sound. The surroundings were pitch black and it was almost impossible to see anything clearly. The tree branches were constantly swaying in the mountain wind. Under the faint moonlight, the shadows of the trees on the mountain walls were like ghosts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, wailing and howling as they demanded the lives of passers-by. Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, was wearing a wedding robe and wandering on the mountain road in the middle of the night. If someone were to pass by and shine a flashlight on her body, not to mention the little guy, even a strong-willed adult would be scared to the point of insanity by Zhao Guifan. She carefully observed the surroundings, but there were no traces of spiritual energy fluctuations in the surroundings. This meant that Zhao Guifan wasn't being cast by someone, but she wandered here in the middle of the night for no reason. A crazy person's brain circuit really couldn't be understood with common sense. She was very interested in Zhao Guifan's situation, so he quietly floated in the air. He wanted to see where Zhao Guifan was not sleeping in the middle of the night and where she was going. There was an abandoned coal mine on the mountain next to Tongjiegu. The winding mud road up the mountain was built by the coal mine owner a few years ago for mining. It was big enough for a large truck to drive normally. The coal mine had been abandoned for many years, and the mud road had been eroded out of shape by the wind and rain. It was very difficult to walk on. Fortunately, it hadn't rained these few days. Otherwise, not to mention Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, even normal villagers would have fallen countless times on the mountain. Zhao Guifan's steps were very slow, so she also walked very steadily. Like a snail, she slowly moved up the mountain along the mud road. Fortunately, the person watching her was Chen Shi. If it was someone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to stand the boring wait and would have directly returned to the house to sleep. Zhao Guifan left at 10 in the evening and walked for nearly 4 hours. At around 2 in the morning, she finally arrived at the abandoned coal mine on the mountain. This was a small coal mine. It was different from the underground coal mine shown in the blind shaft. There was no elevator here. Instead, a hole was drilled into the mountain wall. Then, one would follow the hole and push forward.